Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. I've been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, my lord?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we will have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring capture armor. I do not know what strength is like that. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people fail. Our people. Our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends. What's up, fam? So hopefully, let me know if you guys can hear me. Give me a 5x5. I'm looking on an alternative monitor and you guys can see me. Welcome to Badlands Media, right? The narrative, episode 52, the Golden Age, year one. Obviously, I am not the handsome BB. Okay, good. You guys can see me. He's going to reboot his entire system. He was trying to even add me, and it looks like it didn't even add me until he finally rebooted, which hopefully that means we're on to something. Tonight's conversation is going to be a good one if we can make this happen. Am
I here?
Oh, there he is. There he is, folks.
Oh my god.
The good-looking one has arrived.
Jesus. Yeah, I don't know what's going on, guys, so Alpha might have to save us a bit if this cuts out again. What the hell? I had like a clean run on this show for a long time until last week or the week before. I had a whole snafu going on. That was like a code wrong link thing. And then tonight my internet is telling me it's fine. I'm able to be in the chat with you and with Rumble, and yet none of this would load. So I don't know what's going on.
It was probably a stream. It's probably a StreamYard issue, and they've been doing a lot of updates. So that's probably where it's at.
Maybe it is, because also I noticed right before the show my Telegram wouldn't load, but everything else would load. So even it could be like a server thing. You know, sometimes it's like regional servers that are having issues. But anyway, guys, hope some of you are still here. Thanks, Alpha, for jumping in for a minute. I don't know, how long were you there? Just like a minute.
As soon as you either left or did the reboot, it automatically populated me onto the screen.
Okay. All right, guys. Welcome.
Monologue. I'll be down in the studio again. Let's work it. We're good.
All right. Welcome to the narrative, episode 52. I didn't think of it before now, but little known fact is that there are 52 weeks in a year. And the first episode of the narrative was actually November 2024. But either way, in narrative time, there has now been 1 year exactly of narrative episodes. So it's good to have you here on the basically 1 year anniversary. This is probably your third or fourth time on the show. It's always a good one. And I thought you'd be a good guest for tonight's show. You know, I often say, sometimes I know exactly what I want to talk about like a week in advance before I book a guest, which just means texting somebody at Badlands on late notice. But other times I like to guide the topic toward the guest. This one's a little bit of both. I thought that, you know, we're toward the end of the year. We're at the end of 2025. Every year feels like a very big year in this world, in the info war, for better or worse. And this one maybe is the biggest. I mean, I'd say more than any other year, maybe 2025 was anticipated by people in this audience, you know, the Q audience, the Awakening, the Truth community, certainly the Badlands audience. 2024, I think, was anticipated with a level of anxiety, you know, good and bad, in terms of the big election. But 2025 was branded as the beginning of the Golden Age. So I named this episode Golden Age Year 1. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I want to... it's funny, for as much as we as people, as humans, talk in terms of years and all that, I feel like the info war moves so fast and we're all covering so many things. You know, you do your shows where you're doing 600 different topics a week that we all do. Sometimes we don't actually just like pause. It's like, all right, let's not so much focus on what's in the current media cycle right now and what's matching and what's not matching and what comms we're getting. And let's kind of like actually look at 2025 kind of in a vacuum and see what we think of it from our info war lens. So that's kind of what I want to do. Alpha had some great thoughts for an intro that I want you to dish on before I introduce our sponsors. Then we'll kind of get into the show. But right before we came on, we had a very brief conversation about this show topic, the year in review. And I just thought you had some good comments in terms of, before we get into what we actually thought of the year, what did we build up, and why do you think that there's sometimes this kind of there's sort of a separation often between expectations and reality, you know, in this community in particular.
No, 100%. Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. This is a very professional outfit that I'm running, so
it is, and this is what makes live content great, because you get the wild stuff along with all the great stuff. And as much as from our perspective we hate when things go sideways like that, it's also the silver lining. There's the audience gets to realize this is real.
Never any doubt on that front, I don't think.
You know,
I always think about the people that come in when a show fucks up like that have never seen it, and it's just like 9 minutes of spinning wheel of nothing. But hey, it's part of the charm.
But you know what? And the good thing is we have an active audience who, you know, the chat is always a show of its own, and they did a good job of keeping each other entertained. But the thing, you know, as we go into, you know, kind of what you set me up to talk about right here, I always have to remind myself too. And we had General Flynn that mentioned this probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he's mentioned it ad nauseum at this point too. Is the war we're in is, he goes, and specifically he was talking about Washington crossing the Delaware and you know, going into the darkest hour, and he finished up the statement with saying, it's just, this is a different war. This is 5th generation warfare.
Right.
And I have to remind myself, and I have it on my little notes right here, you know, what is 5th generation war? What is it a war over? And it's perception, it's morale, it's legitimacy, it's our identity. And when you understand that, then you have to reevaluate, you know, one of the big, you know, statements or quotes in the community, and it's, you know, patriots are in control, white hats are in control, there's this plan. And it's, do we fully grasp what that means in the form of 5th generation warfare? Because this isn't a war like we've known in the past over territory. It's the cognitive mind space.
Yeah.
And when we say, well, you know, white hats are in control, do we really understand what that means? And again, this is my speculation, and I could be wrong, but it's, you know, whatever you call them, and I'll say white hats just because it's a term people are familiar with. They're not in control of the outcomes. And if you're someone who subscribes to religion, you know, that's fundamental there, because we have free will. And so if we understand that we have free will, and that our creator is the only one that knows how this entire thing plays out, and there he goes, and I'll continue on with the conversation. I'm sure he will join us. But if we understand that our creator is the only one that knows the full outcome, well, then what do we mean when we say white hats are in control? Or what do we mean when we say there is a plan? Or when we say trust the plan? What does that translate into? And it's, they control the outcomes. That's it, folks. And I know some people are gonna be like, no, they control the outcomes. Or I'm sorry, they do not control the outcomes, they control the options. That's where it's at. The only one that controls the outcomes is we the people, and whatever the plan from our master creator is. And that's what makes us, we the people, such an intricate part of this war, this battle space. And it's understanding that if there is a fight for the narrative warfare, you know, and this shows the narrative, you know, if BB ever decides to join us, right? You know, Alpha is now the host of the narrative. John, we didn't know how to tell BB, everybody. we didn't know, so we decided we'll pull his fiber optics. He'll just have to learn that way. But to continue on this point, as I filibuster and don't want to engage too much without him being here, but I'm sure he would understand, and he can watch the replay, and he would have an expectation that I would maintain professionalism as if it were my own show, and I will do that. So if we understand that they don't control the outcomes and they control the options, well, then what does that mean? How does that set us up into what the narrative is? And we have to empower we the people. That's a fundamental thing that needs to happen. But how do we empower we the people when we have decades, if not more than a century, of we the people being propagandized, being, you know, MK Ultra, mind control, fed this slop of this is who the powers are. This is the way this works. These are who your enemies are. These are who your allies are. This is what's good for you. This is what's bad for you. This is if that is what we've been propagandized into, you have to undo that. And merely telling people the truth doesn't satisfy fulfilling that mission. It just doesn't. So then how do you do it? Well, you got to go back. How did they do it to us? And it was through delegitimizing us as we the people. If you look at over a century's worth of, what's happened in our country or even globally, or I'll say the world, I don't want to upset anybody that doesn't think it's round. But if you look at our world and it says burning bright looking, oh, okay, I thought that was somebody else, is they have delegitimized we the people. And through that delegitimizing us, we have now handed over our power, because it's all done through consent, over into the bad guys, the deep state. So how does that play into this information battlefield, this cognitive war space? Well, it's like this. If you want to empower the people, you got to delegitimize who they think has the power. And that is absolutely what Trump and the team has been doing through his first administration, which was setting it up, right? Fake news, fake news, fake news. And what he's done into 2.0 version of President Trump's administration. When you go back and you look at his first administration, one of the very things he did early on was fake news. It's fake news. It's fake news. And what did that do? It delegitimized the power source to the deep state, to the globalists, to this apparatus that controls everybody. And it started saying, well, then we need to empower other people to do it. And we said, well, who's that? And people stepped up and grabbed the torch and said, I'll do a Substack. I'll do a podcast. I'll host a, virtual town hall in these Twitter spaces. That is what happened. And so now what are you seeing happen in Trump's administration of 2.0? What you're seeing now is the president is exposing who this nation state is, because this is not the government versus Trump. This is the deep state versus our sovereignty. That's what's at play here. So now he's delegitimizing them remember, the White Hats control the options, not the outcomes. And so when you look at, the art of war, Sun Tzu, information warfare, the White Hats have to control the options of what's available to the deep state to force them to make a bad move. Because when they force them to make a bad move, it exposes them. And every time they get exposed, they then become delegitimized in that aspect. When they become delegitimized in that aspect, well, then they lose their ability to control or the power grab that they had on the narrative. And then we turn to say, well, then what do we do? And we see this happen in 2 elections. And there's still no beefy. Let me see if he's texting me, because if he's texting me, yeah, he did. So let me respond back. He said, I didn't realize I was fired. I didn't want to get fired like this. Hold on. Let me just tell him, you're good. Keep trying. He's going to do another hard reboot, folks, and he'll join us. But I'll go through some of the notes that I had for tonight. So again, 5G chess. This is another important term that we have. Some people call it 4D chess. Some people call it 7. There's all these different things. But what does it mean? And what exactly is it? Because it's not about predicting moves. It's about shaping the decision space. And I think, I kind of ran through BB's article that he posted. I believe it was today that he posted it, to kind of get an idea of where he was going and what he wanted with this. And my takeaway through the lens of how I understand this. And if we're forcing our adversaries to only into bad options to expose them, well, what is the purpose of it, and why do we see it happening so much right now? And it's because we have to accelerate the public awareness. And I think the one thing, the one consensus I think we all will agree on is we don't have a whole lot of time. we're just about what 2 weeks away, a week and a half away from, uh, or maybe 2.5 weeks from completing Trump's official first year on January 20th. So that's going to leave us, 3 years until, assuming things stay status quo, we'll be inaugurating a new president, whoever they may be, whether Trump goes for 48, another story. But I think we do understand that we're up against the clock. That clock gets even shorter if we look at midterms. Now, I know a lot of people are saying, but elections are compromised, and they are. But again, white hats control the options, not the outcome. And so if we apply that to a new major hurdle that's coming, from what did we learn in this last year? Because that is kind of the concept of what, and somebody, don't you guys dare put any of that 49er information on the board. You guys know it's a very important game tonight, and I'll be watching it when I'm done, because we still have Q after hours after this, and I'll be watching it after that. It'll be a late night while I work on tomorrow's show. But if we look at this last year, a lot has been delegitimized from the deep state. We have the seditious six that we're showing that they absolutely do not care the level of danger that they create for the military. We have the financial instrument that the deep state has relied on through US AID, through NED. Now we're seeing everything else through the mortgage fraud. We're looking at Waltz and the fraud going on with the Somalis, and through the SNAP benefits. We're seeing that this deep state apparatus has utilized all these ways of, taxpayer money or grant money to fund it. And what has that done? It's delegitimized them by pulling that power away, because now they got to make moves, and it exposes them. And every time they get exposed, we realize they're more dark, they're more shady. It's showing us, the Americans, as well as the rest of the world, that there's a power structure that is in play doing these things. Now, for all of you, you're thinking, yeah, we've known that. We've known this for years now. Great. But we're not the majority, folks. We're not. We are the minority that just happens to be the actionable people, the people that are very important, the people that'll get information and do something with it. But the vast majority of the world's population, including our country, still rely on MSNBC, on Fox, on general media. And so that's why these moves are important. So how does that apply to what's coming in our near future with midterms? My speculation in this fifth generation warfare is that there are multiple battles being fought. There's the battle at the surface level. And that is what all the normies see. It's what we all saw before we took our red pill. And then you have the battle that's just below that. That is the battle that the deep state knows it's going on, and the white hats knows that it's going on. That's the one where there's very limited secrets of intentions. And then there's the battle for the court of public opinion in the realm of people that are aware, because we don't, as much as we want to be in that tier where the bad guys and the good guys know what's going on, we just don't have the intel. We're not read into that. And so if we look at our demographic, we're our targeted group. We are the group that understands there is something going on, but we may not know exactly what it is. And one of the things, and this is one of the things that I had shared with BB, before we started the show, one of the misconceptions that creates a lot of turmoil, and I'll use the word tension. I wanted to save it for BB to use. I had a feeling he was going to use this word. But what creates all this tension? And for those of you that watch the show that I do, something that I've said for years, but I've been harping on it the last 2 months, 2.5 months. And somebody hopefully will say it in the chat before I say it right now, because I want to see that you guys are paying attention. So I'm trying to buy you some time. And it has to do with morale. And I always tell, and my audience will know this, morale is a what? Morale is a weapon. And so when you look at, well, how does tension play into this? Well, if morale is a weapon, then attacking morale, creating despair, is one of the greatest weapons that the bad guys have. And there it is, Donnie Vision. Morale is a weapon. Everybody's coming in with it. Yes, you guys make me proud. I love you so much. If the deep state understands this, then how do they affect the narrative? Well, they got to destroy our morale, which is why despair becomes so important to their weaponization. And what does despair mean in terms of what we're talking about in tonight's conversation, should I ever be joined by my partner, is they have to create tension on their side, because both sides are creating tension. I want people to understand that. But the bad guys have to create tension, because that is, hold on. He says, I mean, I guess I can talk to Alpha through the chat. I will try to glance at the chat, BB, to see if you join in on us. But if the bad guys gotta create despair and they're gonna do tension, well, then that means all the moves that they're making are to accomplish that. The attacking the military, attacking President Trump. What are they trying to do? They're trying to do the same thing the White Hats are doing to them. They're trying to delegitimize his administration. Now, within our community, and this is what makes Badlands such a great community, is we don't all share the same opinions. Some of us on certain topics have vastly different perspectives on this stuff, and other stuff we strongly align in. And that's important, because it shows that we all still are looking through our own lens and perception of what's going on. And that's important when you understand morale, because it gives our audience, well, Alpha says this, but BB says this, but Josh says this, but Brad says that. And it forces you to become actively engaged, because the worst thing that you can be is just an audience. Because if you are just an audience, that means everybody else is going to control your attention, good or bad. And it's all about control, the cognitive battle space. It's what we said at the beginning of this show, the understanding that this is a battle for the cognitive mindset. So the more you can control and recognize on that, the more you're empowered. And why? And this brings us full circle to how I started this conversation. Why is it so important to bring that empowerment to we the people? And that is because since the White Hats only control options, and we, the people, all of a sudden become empowered because everything that we've used to believe in has become delegitimized, then all of a sudden we now control the direction and the speed at which we go to these certain things. And so when we talk about the plan, and we all hesitate when it comes to the timelines, and it's because we feel like we've gotten them wrong so many times. And I would argue, I don't think we have. I think, again, understanding that, good guys control options and not outcomes. I think when information has been pushed to us, whether it's been openly informal or whether it's been through covert ways, whether it's been through private sources, or whether it's been through us being kind of breadcrumbed down a certain path, when we bring information out and say to our audience, hey, this is what we're looking at, this is what my assessment or analysis looks like from this, that pulls the ability for the bad guys to impact our morale. It destroys their ability to create that tension. Now, I don't want you all to misunderstand what I'm saying, that tension is bad, because tension is needed. It's just, it needs to come from the proper place. And this was something that me and BB were talking about in the conversation leading up to him turning into the old Xbox 3 Rings of Death. I'll age myself for those of you that remember that. I used to hate when that would happen. Is if the good guys are needing us to have that empowerment and they're needing that tension, then what does that mean if they don't control the outcomes? Well, then that means we have to recognize that it's not always about the conclusions. When we rely on the narrative's conclusion only, then we miss the story. And the story is the experience. The story is where all the battles are won. It's where our country is shaped. It's where humanity is shaped. And so when we understand, okay, for instance, here's an example I think everybody will understand on what I'm trying to say. And hopefully I'm not losing you guys as I'm trying to keep tabs on everything else as well. A lot of us judge victory on arrest. All right. I think a lot of people will say we haven't seen the mass arrests. And so since we haven't seen the mass arrests, then we're losing. And I would say that is a very bad mindset to have. And why is that? It's because if you're making arrest the conclusion, then you're missing everything in that process. You're missing the fact that how did just normal everyday Badlanders like myself and a few others know all the way back in February and March that when we made the poster still out there, we made public assessments that Trump would have the deep state and the Democrats begging for the Epstein files and that it would backfire on them. Remember, these were conversations both, verbally and through posts, February and March. And now we're here in December about to breach 2026, and that's absolutely happening. And it's because it's the understanding that the conclusion the conclusion only matters at the end when you're telling the story. It doesn't matter when you're in the story because you don't get to just arrive at the conclusion. And I know I'm making sense to me. So if you guys can give me some thumbs up and hey, we're with you so far, I'll keep track on this, but I don't want to lose you guys through the explanation of a crayon eater. So for instance, we understood that. Why? And because we understood that there's a narrative that has to be shaped. There's the public perception that has to be formed, and there's an empowerment that has to be reached. At the same time, a delegitimizing of the bad guys also has to happen. So when you realize all that has to happen, and then you realize it has to happen in every single phase, then you sit back and you're like, oh shit. Okay, now I get it. And good. The thumbs up are there. So that makes me feel much better. So we'll go into that. Here's some other notes that I had. The war on the media. Media has always been the authority on the narrative. And I'm speaking in generalization. Obviously, there's people that have gone against the grain for, the dawn of time, I would imagine. But they're all, again, always the small voice, the mosquito in the swarm. Trump brought in the war on the media, not to prove that they were lying, but to break the monopoly they had on the narrative. And so here's what I would kind of challenge everybody to understand or to think about. Let's just say Rumble didn't exist. Let's just say we go back to the day before Elon bought Twitter. Where were we at that point in terms of being able to fight in this information war, fifth generation warfare? It was difficult. We're getting the shit kicked out of us in our ability to combat the narrative. And why was that? Because our voices were being suppressed. And our voices were being suppressed. Why? Because the deep state had the monopoly. They had the authority on information. And so when we look at the conclusions, what was a conclusion that has already happened to show that we're moving in the right direction? And that conclusion, which some would argue maybe we're still there, I think in its vast, the majority of things, I think we've already won this. And it was our ability to have a voice. We are now in that position. Elon buys Twitter, converts it into X. I understand that there is still censorship and algorithms issues that we're dealing with, but nowhere near the scope that we were prior to that purchase. And so why does that matter? It matters because how can we say we're not winning when if you look back at what's already happened, so not what we're guessing is going to happen, but if we look at what's already happened, this all proves that this battle for the narrative, this battle for information warfare, and I haven't seen a text from BB, so.
Well, you were making a good point. So
there it is. Well, let me land this thought before.
Yeah.
When we look at what's already happened and we can gauge that, okay, well then, if this is already what's happened and we can map these markers to identify phases, and then we can see that there's these repetitive things that happen in each phase, then if we recognize we're in a new phase, then we should look for those patterns of what's already happened in previous phases. And why is all that important? Because it comes down to, and I'll bring it here. I don't know how much you were able to catch, BB, but the tension that's being created. And when we get lost in the chaos and the bad guys are controlling the tension, then that leads to despair. Despair affects morale. Morale is a weapon. And you see how our community starts to get handcuffed.
I heard like the last couple minutes of what you said and little bits and pieces. So first of all, if and when I get booted again, I'm just going to let Alpha take us out, do the outro, and then I'll try to either with Alpha or just do this episode again next week or something like that. I am pretty sure that this is not me. Well, it is me. It's my internet. But I what's so strange is when I get booted out, like my chat works and half of the stuff is working and then other stuff is not. So the only thing I've found so far is that on Down Detector, if I look at Xfinity, which is what I have, there's a spike right around 9 p.m.
It's just so you know, BB, it's StreamYard, because even me on my screen was going black. I could still hear myself, but I couldn't even see myself a few times. But I was watching because I've been monitoring it on another monitor, and it still showed me.
Okay.
So the audience could see me, but there were times where I couldn't see me.
Yeah, there might be something larger going on too with just regional servers or something. Because like I said, I just looked at the Xfinity Down Detector and it was like 30 average reports is up to 190. Anyway, I don't know. I heard bits and pieces. Obviously, Alpha's done a 43-minute intro here. Maybe we can salvage something. It sounded great. I mean, it sounded like everything we were going to talk about. So, and again, I apologize. I don't know what it is. Maybe it is StreamYard, like you said. Maybe it's servers. But I heard the tail end. I think you mentioned sort of the first theater we were going to get into. But a lot of bits and pieces of what I heard you talking about is a great intro. Turned out to be an extended intro, but hey, maybe it works. The idea for tonight's show was going to be to talk about the year in review, year one of the golden age, sort of theater by theater a little bit. We're probably not going to get through all of those. What's your schedule next Sunday night? Or we can reschedule for a few weeks from now. To get through the rest of them.
I'm good for next Sunday as well. So
maybe we can do that. All right. We'll put that as a pending, and if you need to withdraw, you can do so, because I've wasted enough of your time tonight. But we'll try to get through some of this tonight. I think your intro works well either way. I think I heard you talking about kind of the tension coming from both sides, and the reason I think it's worth opening with that kind of a topic. You mentioned 5th generation warfare before I cut out. And then when I came back, you were talking about the engineered tension and how it's going on with both sides. And I think that that's necessary and good, sobering perspective when we try, ironically, to form perspective on a whole year. Something, I don't remember who said this to me. This might have been like Kyle on Defected. I think he had said it at some point. But I've heard it from a few people. One interesting thing I've never been able to get out of my head in recent years is that human beings, like the human mind, while amazing, does not seem like we were designed to put it blunt, to know everything that's going on. And I'm not even talking about, we don't know the future, right? You mentioned full control earlier. We don't know where things are going. We have our theories. We try to map things directionally. But I more mean literally, human beings did not know what was going on in the town next door even 100 years ago. And in the age of the internet, we can know, or at least we're told stories instantly about things that are happening in our town, in our city, in our country, in Canada, in Venezuela, in Syria, in Israel, in China. Like, to try to make sense of that degree of information, even if there was no info war over that information, is a sobering thought. We're not really wired that way. It doesn't seem like it was probably ever the plan to be like, you random person, you got to kind of form an opinion and figure out how events and stories from Syria might be affecting your perceived reality. And you've also got to think about the fact that whoever is telling you those stories, you don't know what their intentions are in what they're telling you. And you don't even know if what they're telling you is true, even if you do know what their intentions are. All of which is to say, what you're saying about fifth generation warfare, I think, it's like these are terms that, as you started with, we say a lot and we use them interchangeably. We all kind of know what each other are talking about when we use fifth gen warfare in InfoWar, but maybe it's worth sometimes taking a step back and trying to get the lay of the land and saying, what does fifth gen warfare really mean? What does information warfare really mean? And there's maybe a little bit of, like, when we reflect on a year in the info war, of making peace with it being okay that we don't know everything that's going on and that we're probably never going to. And that maybe there's a readjustment of mission statement from an info warrior level that is worth taking into 2026. I wonder what you think of that in terms of, 2025. We'll get into kind of some things about how we thought it actually went. But just from an individual, like, info warrior perspective, fifth gen soldier, digital soldier, how has what you were talking about, most of which I caught, I think, how has that changed what you felt like your mission was, maybe at the advent of the Q drops and when you got into this stuff, versus has that changed? Has your perspective on your mission changed with that perspective?
It absolutely has changed. The last time that I was on here, we're talking about the rubber band theory. And I think it was either that episode or one of the other ones. One of the things I had mentioned was my experience when I went to war in 2003. We go to war, our company or our platoon, whatever size you want to look at it, our command staff is given these battle plans. And then they go have a meeting of the officers' minds, and then those officers come down to the platoon level, and then the platoon level kind of map of our mission is given to us. And then even at that point, it's broken down into each individual vehicle, into each individual scout team. So at our biggest, zooming out lens that we had as, these Marine grunts was still only at the company level, which is very small in the grand scheme of the entire theater of war. We had no idea what anybody else was doing. What was 5th Marines doing? What was we didn't know. We only knew that this is what our mission has been given, and this is the course that we're going to take to accomplish that. Why does that matter to now? And it's because of what you said. We have such a vast amount of information that's available to us that it's also become it's become a self-inflicted wound at times. Because you'll get certain people, my priority might be the border. And so if people are talking about other things, I'm like, no, stop. This is what we need to focus on. We start isolating ourselves to only fight on one flank, which is the most dangerous thing we can do when there's all this information that you talked about. We have to look at it in terms of we are surrounded. And we don't have to be experts in everything, but we have to have a responsible enough knowledge base of everything so that we can't be hoodwinked into something. And how has all that affected me in this war now? It's by understanding, one of the things, and I thought it was great, one of the phases or markers that we're talking about was the administrative state. And what has been one of their powerful weapons? It's that they were invisible.
Yep.
Obscurity was something that they thrived on. And what did we see happen through Trump's first administration, but I would say more so in this first year, is he made the invisible enemy become visible. And if you're trying to fight a war, how do you fight a war when you don't know who the enemy is?
Right.
So I started to recognize, in this administration, this dude is identifying the administrative state. He's making them visible for people to be like, that don't sound right. And that don't sound like they have our best intentions. and people started to realize, that helplessness started to kind of be subdued, because now you could point the finger at something. You could point the finger and be like, man, these judges aren't letting them deport people. You could point the finger at, man, so this is what that money from USAID and NED's been doing. And when I started to recognize that he was making the enemy visible, I said, okay, well, I'm still looking at the macro, what does that look like for me in, really zooming in at the micro level. And it's like, oh, it's the war of content creators. It's the war of influencers. It's the war of social media. It's me taking what I recognize and presenting it in a way where my audience knows my opinion. They know the direction I'm going, but they still got to use their discernment, and they still got to become, self-aware and actionable, not just an audience to be like, okay, what's going on? And a perfect example, and I'll get back to you right now, has been, he made these influencers expose themselves. I mean, it's the war of shills going on right now. You know that Spider-Man meme where
that's perfect for right now.
It's literally what's going on right now. And what it's doing, it's making people sit back and say, man, I can't trust the government. I can't trust mainstream media. I can't even trust people on social media. And at that point, you can remain helpless or you can become engaged.
That's a good point. There's a few good points in there. The one you just ended on is interesting because as people who have become apparently, even if we didn't intend to, social media influencers or people that are giving our opinions online, and there's an audience here, right? It can be difficult. I mean, it never stops us, but it can be difficult to comment on those kinds of things, right? Because you're like, well, aren't you guys one of the Spider-Men or several of the Spider-Men? Sure. You can definitely, there's no reason for you to not look at me or Alpha or John or Chris or whoever it is and be like, you're one of those other Spider-Men pointing at the other ones and that. And I would say that is true, but the reason I agree with you about the sort of, we call it the sifting sometimes, right? At Cocoa Beach, the most recent one, the theme that kind of emerged organically out of that, both within Badlands, like us as the content creators, and even within our audience, was this idea of friction and this sifting process that's been going on that I do totally believe Trump has maybe didn't prompt, but certainly prodded and has allowed the space for the fight to go on. I think the analogy, I don't know if it was you, it might have even been you, I don't remember what it was, but somebody recently on the narrative, I had made the analogy of like me and a cousin of mine that's a year older than me, in the middle of like 15 cousins, Irish cousins growing up, just kept ruining everybody's games because we would kind of start getting too crazy with each other. Two of the little brothers trying to be like, well, who's the alpha little brother though? And finally, our older brothers put boxing gloves on us at a family cookout and we're like, you're staying in the yard until you two figure it out. And, the rest is history. We figured it out. And nobody won, nobody lost. We just sort of hit each other a bunch. And then it was like, okay, now everybody knows where everybody's at in the cousins' ranks. And I think he's letting that happen. And I would say, even though we are also in that space of online, amplified voices, amplified meaning you guys in the audience literally amplify our voices just by sharing the content like you do. The encouraging thing about that sifting process and why I have tried to stop worrying about whether or not I am coming off like a shill or something like that, is that ultimately when you get enough friction in the realm of ideas, in the war of ideas, people have to end up trending toward first principles, right? The voices that are speaking have to trend toward first principles, and audiences end up having to do that. That doesn't mean everybody will, right? There's these entire cottage industries of people who just talk about absolute nonsense, and there are cottage industries of audiences who want to hear about absolute nonsense. But I think the reason it's encouraging, you learn to stop worrying about that after a while, even if you lose audience members, which we've talked about. John has talked about that at Badlands this in 2025 of saying like, hey, there might be people that sift out based on not liking our rhetoric, even though, as you said early in the show, we don't have a unified monolith of rhetoric here. But some people just want, another thing I heard you say was, I think one thing we do pride ourselves on is not pretending that we know everything that's going on. And frankly, there is a subset of audience out there that doesn't like that. Not because they think we're evil or like lying, but because they're like, no, I like listening to people who sound like they know exactly what is going on, because subconsciously it makes me feel better to put on whatever report goes on every day and says, this is what's happening in the plan, even though the thing I said last week contradicts this thing. People like hearing the authoritative, like, this is what's happening. You don't have to think about it yourself. So I agree with all that. And I totally agree as well that the great gift Trump has given us in the awakening for the last decade, it is that targeting system that you kind of talked about. Like one of the things that I've said for years is that I think it's really interesting in hindsight that the first sort of enemy Trump targeted rhetorically when he came down the escalator was the media and not the deep state, right? Like he ended up targeting plenty of aspects of the system. But that's why I had written an article that I had sent to Alpha. He was like, I'm going to read this whole thing. I was like, you don't read an entire Burning Bright article before a show, man. That's dangerous. But I had written this article, the wars that were. Follow up in 2024 December, I wrote an article called "The Wars to Come," inspired by Game of Thrones. And one of my favorite scenes in the book is technically a flashback to a past fight scene. And one of the characters that you learn about in the story that dies, a knight that dies in that duel, for like 5 books, you have this whole story of why that duel happened from like the hero's perspective. And then eventually you get the other knight's perspective. So a key phrase is totally inverted once you know the context. The loser of the duel says, "I wish you good fortune in the wars to come." And like when you first read that scene, you're like, oh, what a dick. Like, this is the bad guy. And then with the benefit of hindsight, you're like, oh man, he knew what was going on, and he knew that this whole duel had been orchestrated and that there was people pulling strings, and he knew he was going to die. And I think about that all the time with the InfoWar of saying, like, what are the future versions of us going to think about how we are currently approaching the InfoWar? Which is, again, like, that's kind of writing stuff like that isn't meant to say, this is what I think we should focus on. It's more just to say, I think we should all be thinking about how we are evolving as digital soldiers, and that this sifting process that you mentioned that Trump is putting us through, essentially, it's a make or break. Like, you're either getting stronger through that and more discerning and leveling up, or you are getting beat down by it and kind of siloed or doomed out, or opposite of doomed out, you're becoming an authoritarian yourself, where you're the official arbiter of truth in the truth community.
Which we can find ourselves a victim of sometimes.
Yep.
Sometimes you can be so accurate in your assessment that you forget that it's still a very small assessment in the big plan. Do you remember Zelda and Metroid? Like way back, you would get to points in those levels, right, where it was hard, and so your objective was no longer beating the game. Your objective was, how do I beat this checkpoint? How do I beat this part? So you would go, you would try a tactic, you would lose and die, and you were okay with that death because you knew that didn't work. And so you approach, every time you came to this part, you approached it with not the intentions of finishing the game. You just wanted to figure out how to beat this part. And so you didn't mind the losses. You didn't mind what was happening. You'd go, and then when you'd finally beat them, then all of a sudden, caution, precaution, strategy, all that came right back in, because you're like, oh, okay, all right, I'm back to now I want to finish the game. And then you come to that part again, and what it was this? These were just phases.
Right.
These were just phases in the game that once you realized you were in a phase, you weren't really thinking long term. You knew long term that this entire game had to be played, but you knew at that moment you just had to figure out what the strategy was for that phase. And that's what matters here. One of the things that you said that kind of made me think about, and I went to look it up because I wanted to see what the exact words of it are. And if we don't have full control of our mind, then we're not ever sovereign, ever. And so sovereignty, there's the official definition, but I like, I'm a Marine, I eat crayons, I like to go to the simple terms. What's sovereignty in simple terms? This is sovereignty is the ultimate power and authority a state or governing body has over its own territory, meaning it can rule itself, make its own laws, and manage its affairs without outside interference. So then if we turn around and look at our individual sovereignty, if we're relying on government, are we sovereign? If we're relying on podcasts, are we sovereign?
Right.
If we don't have full control and rule over our own mind, if we don't have cognitive sovereignty, then we're never free. And so I truly think that, podcasts like this one and so many others are important because, like you said, you don't have to know everything, but you got to know that you always have to be thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a thing, for better or worse, we've all been influences on each other, certainly, especially those who remain at Badlands. I think we've influenced each other in interesting ways, and sometimes subconscious ways, like we'll find each other using terminology from each other that we're not even consciously thinking of, right? Something that just popped into my head is, Chris Paul uses what I would describe as ruthless epistemology, like ruthless adherence to the truth. And the trick there, or at least my perspective on this, is that he doesn't claim to know the truth. In fact, he's one of the few people that claims very strongly to not know the truth. And yet a guy like that can employ ruthless epistemology, ruthless adherence to a logical process of attempting to discover the truth. And to your point about so if people on podcasts or in the media or in government, even white hats, quote unquote, or even military leaders, if they cannot be trusted, and by that I don't mean morally trusted, but literally if what they are saying cannot be trusted as objective fact because we don't know, what is the value? And I still think there is value to be found in that epistemological process, in the observing thought processes of other people, coming into conflict with those thought processes, or I used to use the Bruce Lee mentality a lot when I was fighting, but then just as a philosophy, he had this quote that I think he took from another philosopher. He said, take what works, leave the rest. That was his whole approach to fighting. So kind of a precursor to modern mixed martial arts. A lot of people do say that he was, kind of ahead of the game on that in terms of mixing styles. And I would agree with that. And that applies to the info war for sure. There's times like we don't get a lot of time to watch each other's content because we're trying to make our own thing. Or like you said a few minutes ago, we're digging in our own theaters. Like we're on our own mission. So we're like, oh, what do you got? What's Alpha doing over there? Like, oh, that's cool. Like, we'll probably talk about it at some point, but I'm focused on this. But one of the interesting things about that is that I think we create our own sort of fighting styles, cognitive fighting styles, and we hone them in certain ways. And then we observe how each other are battling in the info war. And we often observe each other losing a battle. So there might be a thing where maybe it's you, Josh, and Brad bring up you do a Q proof, or you're talking about something there. And I'll see that and I'll be like, man, I might completely disagree with where one or two of you or three of you take the conclusion of what the maybe you saw a hit or something like that, and you're like, this is what I think it means. And I might look at that and be like, I don't think that's what it means at all. But I was not thinking about that drop until you guys brought it back up, and now I'm thinking of something totally different as a result of that, right? So I think that's kind of what's encouraging there. And again, the reason I bring up Chris Paul is that influence thing where it's like, hey, you don't have to believe everything you're looking at is fake or a lie. And I don't think he does believe everything is a lie. He just considers that everything could be a lie. And I think a lot of our audience and a lot of us have realized, like, hey, that isn't hiding from opinions. That's really protecting yourself from others, to your point, from others being able to subvert your sovereignty by tricking you, by hoodwinking you. I mean, hoodwinking is the word he uses all the time. John talks about this a lot when it comes to elections, of like, hey, are we ceding our sovereignty? Jonathan Drake and I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago on the narrative all about that. I don't agree with necessarily everything Drake says about the Constitution, but man, it's a strong argument when you're saying, hey, before we argue about whether or not our elections are real, is it worth arguing over whether or not we have made a mistake in being a republic that holds elections in order to decide what we do as a country? Like, when I say that, I don't know what the answer to that is, but it is worth having a conversation about that as people, as individuals, and as a nation, of saying, to your point about sovereignty, can you be a sovereign if your system of society is such that every 4 years you vote for other people to wield your power, right? That's what the government is. The president, many could argue, is the ultimate sovereign symbol. He's the sort of sovereign projection of all of our power. And that's okay if you think that that's the right thing. But there's certainly an argument that's not irrational to have, of saying, maybe this question of sovereignty that Trump has largely re-sparked in the American mind is something that we need to take a lot further than where we've taken it. And I think that there's steps to that, right? There's, like, maybe that means that we might be entering a whole era where we're still doing this whole president's thing and we're trying to get that back in some semblance of order. But we shouldn't discard the fact that we shouldn't pretend that the final solution is making sure we have real elections and that we have good presidents. There might be a different way of looking at the world than the way the founding fathers looked at it. And as I've been saying for weeks, and again, Jonathan Drake talks about a lot, the funny thing was, when you read about the founding fathers, they did not agree, even after ratification, of whether or not they had done the right thing. So it's kind of interesting that this whole community has kind of built itself, and conservatism in America has largely built itself on this adherence to a system of government that the people who set it up didn't quite know if they had done the right thing or not. So I think all of that, just to bring it back to the 2025 and bring it forward, is one of the things I like the most about Donald Trump is he doesn't strike me as somebody who is trying to tell us what our future should be. It's more that he's trying to say, maybe we should all get on the same page of what it should not be. And that's been one of the kind of gifts that this era has given a lot of us.
No, 100%. If we're all agreeing in unison and our creator hasn't landed here on Earth, somebody's lying. And if somebody's lying, that means somebody's scheming. And if somebody's scheming, that means another war is afoot. We should always have the same objectives, but we should always, in some aspects, have different ways of how we think it's better to get there. And then we should argue and fight over those. And then in that discord, somebody will concede and be like, okay, that is either a better plan, or there's less consequence to that plan, whatever the remedy may be. I agree with that. I was listening to what you were saying right now, and you one of the things I love about you, BB, is you force me into like these war strategy mindsets that I had. And I remember there was a detective, a younger detective that we had, and he'd come in and we'd be doing a homicide, and he'd start talking about something, and they would just generate something. I was like, I didn't think about that, like you said, and I'll start thinking about, okay, we need to look at this through that. And so one of the things you made me think about right now is, what's something that has been weaponized? And it's unity, right? We want unity. And I think here at Badlands, we're like, no, we love having discord, right? We love
Yeah.
we
That's
love
sort of become our theme. Like if we had one enemy in 2025, we sort of picked out unity as the enemy, ironically.
it is because here's the thing. If there's an enemy at your gates and you feel unified, you're vulnerable. Until the enemy's been eradicated, if you're trying to just be unified, you are making yourself vulnerable. You're making yourself susceptible to infiltration, to a whole bunch of, like, you open up Pandora's box for a bunch of bad things, because the pursuit of the truth and victory is going to create unification just through its process. You don't need to talk about it or preach about it. And how do I know this? Because Trump's doing it. Trump is doing things right now that here, and this is my perspective, they're the darkest, probably most chaotic information battle hasn't happened yet. And the reason I know it hasn't happened yet, because had it did already happen, he wouldn't be pushing, or they wouldn't be pushing to expose the infiltration and the shills that are at play right now. So if we are exposing, grifters and operatives and signature reduction players that have made their way into podcasting, if he's trying to make sure that he's exposing this entity, that's because there's something down the pipeline that is going to be a major information battlefield that he needs all of us to know who's reliable and who isn't. And that may be yourself.
Right.
It may not be an external part. And so that means that, and I'm speaking information, not kinetically, information wise, there's something major that is still going to approach us. And I think right now is before you go to war, what do the generals do? It's like Hansel and Gretel. They feed you, they plump you, they get you all happy because you're about to go into some nasty. And right now, I think that this exposure and all this is prepping us. I do think that unity itself will be something that has its phase, but it's not now. I think what we're in a preparation for that. And when it comes, is this going to be something that's recognized? It's like when you see in the movies, all the bad guys are coming in through the window and through the roof, and one guy's like this, he's battling everybody, and all of a sudden he bumps into a guy and he turns around to shoot that, and then he realizes, oh, they're together. And they're just fighting, they're fighting back to back. None of them stopped and said, hey, bro, we're on the same team. No, it was just, oh, you're trying to kill those dudes, I'm trying to kill those dudes. Obviously, we have the same mission. There was no conversation that took place. It was recognition. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And again, this is one of the things that I think 2025 has exposed. And I think it's very important for what's coming ahead.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. I think I want to respond to that and maybe one more sub-intro topic. This is an extended intro. It all happens for a reason. I think it's necessary. I do want us to get into like 2 or so theaters before you get out of here tonight. But I think this is great. That's why I like, even when I don't have technical difficulties, letting this show breathe and go where it's going to go. Because I like that. I like the way you frame that, of sort of clearing the battle space, right? Or mapping the battle space. You as a big Q guy are familiar with mapping began long ago. That's certainly one of the more sort of ubiquitous drops or sayings that I think stuck in a lot of our heads from years ago. Usually we think about that or talk about it from the lens of 5th generation, or from the lens of military intelligence, the people who probably most likely put this counterintelligence plan together, counterinsurgency plan together. So there's that style of mapping, cartel networks. Like on the military lens, you understand it. On the 5th gen warfare lens, I think a lot of this community understands it, like mapping these networks, domestic networks, even mapping media networks. What you're talking about, I think, is an even deeper level of that, which is probably a good sign. Speaking of 2025, spoiler alert, I do think it was a successful year, despite maybe some of our commentary at times, people perceiving as negative. I think that that can be a little bit of an unfortunate byproduct, I think, of people who are maybe wired to assess and remove threats, right? Like, I think a lot of us are wired that way. You were an actual soldier, but you don't end up doing shows like in the info war for years and years and spending all of your waking hours looking into this stuff if you don't have like a threat assessment mindset. And I think sometimes people have perceived, like, you know, specifically on the power hour, where we're like, hey, we got to look at this and we got to look at that and whatever. Even sometimes sort of criticizing segments of the Q community, segments of the truth community, segments of MAGA, which I have done quite a bit this year. People perceive that as being like, oh, you're kind of going against unity or the movement, as you said. And to me, I think it's like, no, if you've got a soldier who's kind of like, you probably have the one in the foxhole, so to speak, that's always like, don't get too high because there might be some shit over there. And maybe some of the other guys in the unit get annoyed at him, but it's like, you know, every once in a while, he was right. And you're like, oh man, it's a good thing we didn't kind of relax. Or maybe some new guy comes into the crew and one of your friends doesn't like him. And you're like, man, you know, John Harold's such a dick. And everybody else is like, yeah, he is a dick. But even besides that, in this metaphor, he could be being a dick. But then later on, it's like, oh, it turns out that guy was a total piece of shit and had negative intentions. And the people in the group, or the one guy in the group who didn't like him, maybe couldn't articulate why, but there was some alarms going off on some level. And again, that's why I think when you learn to trust people that you know, it's not, for me, this is a change I've made mentally, where I've learned to not trust that they're right. I've learned more to trust my own interpretation of them. You know, like, if I learn how you think, if I learn how Chris thinks, how John thinks, then I can use other Badlanders as sort of antenna, like as these little targeting systems on their own. They'll pick up on things I'm not calibrated to pick up on. And then I can pick up on things that they're not calibrated to pick up on. So I think maybe what's gone on this year, to your point, is that if all of this infighting within the influencer sphere results in a certain portion of them losing a lot of reputation and meaning a lot of power projection, then yeah, that would probably be you'd probably want to hold back a lot of your actual disclosures before these people, or until after these people really have lost a good degree of their reputation and their pull because of it.
Let me say something to that real quick, because I know you wanted to shift here, but it's important.
Go for it, man.
You know, whether I use, you know, combat from the military or law enforcement, and one could argue, well, law enforcement's paramilitary anyways, and I would acknowledge that to a point. In both those worlds that I did, there were certain things that every couple of months we did them again. Some of that was shooting. You go and you qualify and you do shooting training. Some of that was arrest and control techniques. Some of that was CPR. There were certain things in both these campaigns that you routinely did it again. And so the question is, well, why did you routinely do it again? Because it was qualified under this heading: perishable skill. If you didn't keep doing it, it goes away. And then when that moment comes and you need it, you're only going to be as good as you are as rusty. And so if we look at, and I say this all the time, is if we're in a war, whether you want to, you know, classify it as an information war, fifth generation war, hybrid, whatever, then those rules still apply. So then you got to look at, you know, map our battlefield. In this realm of war that we operate in, what would be considered perishable skills? And I'll tell you, one of the most important ones that is a perishable skill is discernment. If you're not constantly coming back and practicing discernment, you're going to get rusty and you're going to get hoodwinked. And so when you have shows like the Power Hour, that force you to have this engaged conversation, what is that doing? You're training that perishable skill known as discernment. It may apply in that show, it may not, but you're still engaging it. You're training it. And that's extremely important. And so when I was looking at that, I was like, man, that's really good. And sometimes, you have the asshole sergeant, and sometimes you have the sergeant that everybody wants to be on his shift, but at the end of the day, they both are doing the same thing. They're making you go and do these perishable skills. The other thing that it doesn't matter if it's military or law enforcement, you do 2 times a year at a minimum is an evaluation. There's somebody that comes to you, whether it's your sergeant or lieutenant, but you do an evaluation to see where you are. What did you do really good on that you can now maximize to try to become an expert or an authority in? And what are you struggling in? And identify those struggles, because maybe Detective Joe over there is really good in it. And then I compare you with that person the next couple months to bring you, not to make you an expert, to make you feel confident in your ability to do that. And so I would tell people, if you think you're in an information war, which I do, practice those perishable skills and do a self-evaluation of who you are and where you're at.
Yeah, that's well said. And on your DPH point, and plenty of the shows for sure, but obviously we can be a little ornery at times. And again, I blame the Heroldian dialectic for that. But I'm sure, to your point, a lot up the audience.
That comment, the greatest comment in the
fantastic.
Chat. Real Mrs. Wright says, "Nice of BB to show up in his own show."
It's because she got to see me Irish and pissed while I'm stomping around the house, being like, "What the fuck did you do? What did you do, Mrs. Wright?" And she's sitting there being like, "My internet's not really working great either." I'm like, "All right, well, you're acting a little sketchy. So somebody fucked with some of my internets, okay? I had all kinds of internet, and then all of a sudden it was disrupted. So leave it to the Canadian." But I was going to say that part of this, we mentioned you mentioned the perishable skills. I think that's interesting. I never heard that term, but people might be watching DPH, and half the time the audience, let's say we have one of those contentious episodes, half the time the audience is probably like, "I have finished the episode. I listened to all your arguments. I think you guys are fucking idiots." And it's like, well, hey, guess what? Whatever counter opinion that you have on the back of that episode, you probably feel even stronger about having kind of engaged in that cognitive debate, even if you're not literally debating us. Sometimes you are in chat, but even if you're just yelling at your screen or thinking really hard at your screen, you're engaged in that. In the fight world, again, we've talked about this before because you had some experience there besides in the actual combat world. But it's interesting as you get older in the fight game, and you kind of, in hindsight, if you have good coaches, kind of realize some of the training exercises you were doing, to your point, were not for the reasons you thought. So on the combat sports realm, we used to do a thing called Shark Tank, which a lot of people might know about, which is essentially you'd have sparring. If you have a fight booked, you'd have certain sparring days where training partners are going to go pretty hard at you, or you're going to bring in a guy from another gym maybe to give you a different look. Usually if they did that, they're going to be really careful, because if you don't know each other, you're going to get that pit bull thing going on where you're like, well, I might meet you on the local circuit at some point, so I'm just going to let you know. So you'd have the two coaches being like, remember, you're both training for separate fights, so you're trying to help each other out. But I remember this Shark Tank was, they would rotate fresh fighters in on you. So if you were the one who had a fight coming, I used to fight in 2-minute rounds and then 3-minute rounds in the kickboxing world. The UFC, those guys do 5-minute rounds. And just for anybody who's never done a 2-minute or a 3-minute round of any combat sport, one of the most impressive things about the UFC guys is the fact that they're doing 5 minutes is absurd. But anyway, we would do 2-3 minutes, and eventually we started doing 5-minute rounds. In the Shark Tank, they would rotate a guy in every round. And then eventually, if they did an ultimate Shark Tank, they would rotate a fresh guy in every 60 seconds on the same guy. you know, they weren't supposed to beat the ever living shit out of you, but like they're just fresh and they're going to hit you and they're going to take you down. A lot of times that's what they do to demoralize you. They just keep hitting a double leg and it's like they're fresh. So they're hitting you. It's probably the fifth double leg you're trying to defend. But at the time I was like, oh, this is to toughen you up. And this is to, you know, make it so that if you can like fare well against that many different fresh fighters, it's going to translate into your skills and into the fight itself, which is partly true. But over time, I really realized that, no, they were trying to break you, and they knew they were going to. Like, no matter how good you think you are, if your rotating training partner isn't on you, like, you are not going to do well. You are going to get beat down, get worn down, and get exhausted. And really what it was all about is you might have 5 fights in a row that you come out of it fairly clean, or the fights are quick, but there's going to be that one where that guy drags you into hell. And if you haven't been there, it's not about that, oh, magic, I've been here before. Magically, I know all the answers. It's like, no, it's really just about not freaking out and losing your mind when you feel that feeling. In the fight game, it was that exhaustion feeling. Like, that's actually the most terrifying feeling that used to happen to me in fights. It's not like you get hit really hard. That's not the stuff that actually scares you, I think, when you're in there. It's when you start to feel tired. You're like, oh no, I don't have anything left. Where do I get it? So you could also, to bring it back to the InfoWar, look at that a little bit of saying like, man, besides the sifting you mentioned of these influencers being delineated and marked, maybe part of it is like this attrition mindset that Trump and patriots have kind of employed on the InfoWar, digital soldiers, and just the American people of being like, yeah, like it's not just going to be sunshine and rainbows the whole time. Maybe the timeline is artificially extended for some of these touch points and inflection points we want to hit, because they're trying to get you exhausted and be like, who's really here? Like, who's in it? Who really wants this? And who's just going to go back to the 9 to 5 and be like, I don't care anymore. You know, maybe that's part of what they're doing as well as coaches.
I remember my exact fight and exact moment that I experienced what you described for the first time. And in my mind, these were the words I said. Oh shit.
Yep.
And I had an hour-long conversation in about 2.5 seconds in my mind of how I was going to navigate that oh shit moment. Because like you said, you know, it's either going to break you or you're going to have to figure it out. And because of that sustained training you're talking about, you know, I was in a position to be like, okay, you know, this is how I'm going to adjust my strategy. And I'm very serious when I say an hour-long conversation in 2 to 3 seconds.
Oh, time slows down. Yeah.
what your brain is what our brains are capable of doing in milliseconds is fascinating. And I used to think it was very surreal to see footage of some of my fights afterwards, because I was like, man, that's not how I remember it. Just totally divorced from the objective reality. I had a fight one time where I got kicked, of course, by a shot I didn't see, and stayed on my feet, but was gone in my mind. And I think I had something like 20 seconds left in the round, and I survived to the end of the round, and I ended up winning a split decision in that fight. But in that moment, like that 20 seconds might have well have been 3 hours, because in my mind, I was like, I had never been rocked to I thought I had been rocked in training, but I had never been rocked until that fight where I was like, oh, this is what they meant. And went to do the step, the back foot step, and had a little wobble. And then it was all about like, did that guy just see my foot twitch? And you know, it's like you're like two sharks, but then one of you's bleeding, and you're trying to hide that you're bleeding from the other one. But yeah, man, it's the good thing is that that training did pay off, and it doesn't mean you have this magical get out of jail free card, but it means like when the guy entered the pocket against me to finish me off, he got met with whatever I had left, and that was enough to just get me to the end of the round.
It's like, it's enough to just get him to say, oh, man, maybe he's not that badly hurt. Spoiler alert, I was badly hurt, and you probably could have knocked me out. But, you know, sometimes it's a fake it till you make it.
And why is this conversation so important? Because I can tell the audience right now, 99% of the people watching this podcast right now, you've all experienced that. Maybe not in a fight, but I'll tell you guys where we all experienced it together. January 20th, 2021.
Oh, yeah.
When we all saw Biden get inaugurated. There were some people that said, oh, shit, and went down a very dark path. And there's some people that said, this is not what was supposed to happen. What does it mean? And there were some people that took the hit on the chin and kept pushing forward. And we all got to see how people handled that situation for 4 years. And that was it. That was one of those oh shit moments in this information war.
Damn straight, attrition works. Let me hit a couple sponsors before we move along here. And again, if Alpha is available, we're gonna do an extended edition of this show for next Sunday night. So that's good. I actually was thinking before we got on the show, even before all the technical difficulties, I was like, man, there is no way we're going to be able to have the conversation I want to and know is possible in one episode, especially because Alpha has his midnight show for us on the East Coast. So I don't want to take these guys all the way until their show. So I'm going to let him out so he gets some prep time for that one. But maybe this will just be mostly an extended intro to a recalibration of the InfoWars, kind of what it's turned into, which I think is good, sets us up well for more of a micro discussion next week. But let me hit a couple sponsors, and then I got a couple more things I want to hit Alpha with. And if you guys have anything, shoot over a rant. They are working. I saw people concerned about the rants you sent in early in the show. I do have them. So thank you for sending those in. If you send anything in, I will hang out with you guys a little bit after Alpha leaves and do that stuff. Our sponsors tonight, one of them, speaking of horrible people, is Jordan Sather. I suppose he's our friend. Conscious Strength. Maha yourself with supplements that don't suck. From Conscious Strength, founded by Badlands' very own Jordan Sather in 2019. Conscious Strength products are made in America and won't break your bank. Unlike other online brands, the lineup includes collagen for joints and hair, electrolytes to get rid of cramps, greens powders that taste good and mix easy, Shilajit gummies, methylene blue, zeolite. I actually took some zeolite today. And more. Oh, that was from Jordan. I was like, where is this from? And I think it was Jordan's. So we had zeolite today, and that's why maybe my powers were causing my internet to go out because I had too much zeolite. So he sells zeolite. Flip the finger to Pharma, be your own doctor. Get supplements you can trust from Conscious Strength. Go to badlandsmedia.tv/strength to shop now. That's badlandsmedia.tv/strength. And our other sponsor tonight is our good friends at Tamarack Gardens, who I have ingested more Tamarack Gardens stuff in the last month, battling various illnesses than ever before. Are you looking for a better alternative to the over-the-counter drugstore medications? Tamarack Garden began from a parent's desperate need for safe and effective options for kids tired of toxic chemicals. Taking matters into their own hands, they began crafting medicine from weeds, wildflowers, and herbs, the original time-tested healers that modern medicine can't match. Packed with antiviral herbs to boost immunity and fight illness, Tamarack Garden has, for a limited time, elderberry and rosehip syrup kit available. Not only is it delicious and easy to make, it will keep you and your family healthy all fall and winter. Introducing Tamarack Garden's new baby line, clean, non-toxic, and gentle for newborns and moms. It relieves cradle cap, diaper rash, stretch marks, and postpartum pain. Visit tamarackgarden.com today. Use the promo code BADLANDS for $10 off over orders over $50. That's 20%. That's tamarackgarden.com, promo code BADLANDS. Remember to eat your weeds. All right, thank you to all our sponsors tonight. And can confirm we have used their products on ourselves and even our child. And we're all doing pretty well. So one other thing I wanted to get to before we start the show is something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned, you sort of were talking about these different units having different missions. We've talked about that last time you were on the show, so I won't belabor that point. But one new wrinkle it made me think of is I kind of opened the show that you then spoke to the audience on this topic of the mindset, sort of entering 2025, InfoWar mindset. What was our mindset going into it? Has it shifted? And when you talked about the different objective-based warfare, it kind of made me think, this sounds like a simple point, but you mentioned how we all kind of go in different directions. Like I focus on Russia research a lot. Like any conversation you have, Ghost is going to bring up, like he itches until he's like, Israel, and you can see him doing it every time. But he's the one that we trust because he's over there on that mission, right? And another factor there that I'm thinking of when it comes to, was 2025 in the info war and in the awakening and in the plan, however you define that, successful? A lot of your answer to that probably depends on what theater you were engaged in. And that could be like day to day, week to week, or year to year. And I think that affects all of us a lot more than we think about. You know, in warfare, like you're talking about, if you were supposed to take out a bridge and you did, like your unit is probably like, we're fucking winning, boys, right? But the guys who were supposed to land a Black Hawk helicopter and like rendezvous with a different company, and then that company got wiped out or whatever it was, right? They're not feeling like they're winning, even though maybe the overall objectives are being pushed forward. And for me, my favorite theater, I guess, one of them is kind of Sovereign Alliance, the geopolitical game board. And even John, I saw he had a good call where he was like, I bet Putin and Trump are going to have a phone call that's announced right before this latest Zelensky meeting. If you're following that theater and you believe in the Sovereign Alliance and everything, you're probably feeling pretty good all year. You're like, man, this is pretty funny. Trump and Putin's get back and forth is funny. Trump and Xi is back and forth is funny. But if you've been focusing on like elections as your theater and not paying any attention to geopolitics, when you then kind of dip your toe into that world without context, maybe your reaction is like, man, this seems really, really tense. And I know like Burning Bright's talking about the Sovereign Alliance, but I don't know, these dudes seem pissed at each other and they're all threatening each other, which I don't think is a lack of discernment, which is another thing you were talking about. Sometimes it's like, it's literally that your discernment is being applied in a specific theater where I say something about elections that Ash and CanCon are like, that's fucking stupid. And here's all the reasons why, because that's how they've been calibrating and that's the mission that they've been on, where I've been on this other path. So it's kind of I think it's good to keep that in perspective, that your perspective on how things are going probably depends on where you have, I guess the difference in the InfoWars, it's where you have deployed your attention and where you have deployed yourself. Where in warfare, it would be where you have been deployed by command.
Absolutely. I went and pulled up, I had some notes on this. Every now and then, I'll be like, oh, it's a good thought. So I'll go put it down. I'll put it in my notes because I always tell myself, I'm going to use this for something at some time, right? And then, you know, months, if not years later, I come across something. I was like, hey, that was a good thing. I never used it. Well, you have brought life to one of those note cards. So here's the notes that I had, and it goes into, how do I know if I'm winning or losing in an information war? And, you know, the understanding of, you know, or my understanding of it is it's targeting my cognitive mindset. And so if I recognize that this information war, this 5th generation warfare we're in is not physical conquest, then how do I gauge whether I'm winning, losing, or remaining static? And these were the things that I came up with. And like I said, this list can be a lot longer, but these were 3 things that I found important to me, at least at the time that I wrote this, and I think they still apply. What is the Psy War target? And these were the 3 things I came up with: nervous system, attention, and patience. And so if I know that these are things that are used to stress myself out or stress out the community, to make the community or myself tired, or even fracture, you know, the community or myself, and I know it targets these things, then when I'm doing my evaluation, and this tees right up into, you know, earlier tonight, you know, doing these self-evaluations or these evaluations of our community, if I can look at myself and look at my audience and be like, we just had a major thing happen, whether it's a false flag, a headline, or a move Trump made that we didn't like. Then how am I reacting? How's my audience reacting? And if I see that our nervous systems are being maintained, if I see that our attention is not being divided or controlled or manipulated, and I'm seeing that we're being patient in how we approach this, then I'm looking at it like, okay, then we're doing good. We are winning, because prior to this, before Trump came out, a statement, we talked about earlier, when he first came out, who did he attack? Mainstream media. This was the megaphone of the globalists, of the deep state, whatever you want to call them. This is how they've controlled us. And if we can look at any scenario, and you can plug in any scenario that you want right now, and if I look at those three things and I'm like, all right, I'm holding up good. It's to ourselves who have been in a fight, you take that shot and it hurt, and it was unexpected.
Yeah.
But you can be like, my knee didn't touch the canvas. I didn't get KO'd. I'm still up. I'm still in this fight. Okay, so good. I have that. But I also realized that, okay, do I know why I took that hit? Was it because I showed a punch that I was going to throw and he countered it before, I did anything? Did he deploy something that I didn't recognize earlier? And now can I figure out how he did that and got in there? That's me taking a hit that hurt. And I'm remapping how I'm going to counter that. And so to answer your question, that's one of the things that I can look back at 2025 and be like, okay, there are some things here that maybe didn't go the way I wanted, maybe didn't happen at the speed that I wanted it to happen at. But how did it affect the info battlefield, the cyber battlefield of not just myself, but the people that I have a responsibility to, and that's my audience. And if I can look back and generally be like, we're good. And now the cool thing is, BB, I have ways to gauge it beyond just a visual analyzation of the social media board. Right. I can look back, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, at the emails that would come in and the DMs that would come in and the sheer level of panic from people. And now I can look at these same, because the emails still come in, and a lot of them from these same people. And I'm looking at how there's these controlled deliveries. I don't see the panic and anxiety in their questions anymore. I see it as in, hey, this didn't make sense. Is it because of this or is it because of that? Which tells me they're thinking. Before, they were just seeking an answer because it was panic. And now it's like, hey, I'm looking for some direction, but I also speculate, is it this or is it that? That's winning, bro. In an information war, that's winning.
That's well said. And, it makes me think that one of the things I said earlier this year that I now maybe would apply even more ruthlessly is, or I didn't say this at the beginning of this year, rather. I said this in 2022 during the Righteous Russia series, actually. There's a part 5, I think, in that series I titled The Mind War. And, I'm not the only person who's used that terminology. You talked about it earlier. But I applied it to the Russia-Ukraine theater. And, my intention at that time was to say, remember, way back in 2022, I would say even 90% of MAGA was like, Russia bad. This is really bad. And, my point was to say, okay, don't take my word for it, even though I had certain convictions. Think about who is telling you these stories, right? Like, at the very least, whether or not you jive with my story, you have to be able to reverse engineer, why do you think the things that you think? And man, is that something that you will discover just by asking. The vast majority of people do not know why they believe the things that they believe. And that is staggering. Like, that is a completely, and I mean bipartisan, truthers and non-truthers. That's less common in truthers. Truthers tend to be like aware of media manipulation, right? Which is good. There's some level of manipulation going on with them. But, you know, there is a reason that, especially on DPH, there's we really kind of hammered the Unity crowd hard in 2025, because there are people that you deal with this all the time, because you do a few Q-themed shows that are very popular and they're well done, but you get a whole gamut of different audience members, right? You get people who kind of see things the way you guys do. You get people who definitely do not. And then I think there's this passive audience, plan audience, awakening audience, Q audience, that doesn't mean they're negative or holding anything back or anything, but they don't actually, all they're actually doing is like looking at the things Trump's saying and being like, good, this is good. Even if Trump often contradicts his own statements week to week. And you might be right that what he said was good, but what's happening there is that you're revealing that you're actually outsourcing your discernment. You are not actually thinking about these things. Even there's many people that you deal with that have read all the drops, and they think that like that means that they're in the info war and they're engaged in the info war. When it's like, okay, have you thought about what these mean? Has it made you change the way you have approached information warfare? Or are you just waiting for the next drop to tell you what to think, or the next interpretation of the drop, rather than using that as augmentation? And another point I make on the media front is that, or just the info war in general, we'll relate it back to combat sports because it's my favorite. I remember another bad fight I had, probably the worst fight I had, was one where I realized when it happened, like almost immediately, that I had been patterned in this fight. So I remember it was in Hyde Park, Boston. I was fighting this guy. He was a Hispanic fella, which I've never forgiven your kind for. Another fight I escaped out of, but did not, took a lot of damage. Things were going okay, like was doing well. It wasn't the most exciting fight in the world, and I was kind of taking like a meat and potatoes approach. I was a counter striker, so my whole thing was like, if you're not going to come at me, I'm just going to sting you. Like, and that probably means some of my fights I won a boring decision, but whatever, I'll take it. And that's kind of how that was going, where it's like I was hitting him with a jab, I was hitting him every time he came in, not too much damage was being done. But he threw a cross a few times, a lead hand hook, and I ducked it. So this had happened maybe 2, maybe 3 times in the fight. And the third or fourth time it happened, he threw the same hook, and I ducked the hook right into a head kick. And, of course, in hindsight, I'm like, you fucking idiot. Like, this is what you do. And you fell right into it. And it was a good learning lesson. It dropped me on my ass. It's the first time I had ever been dropped, like bad in a fight. And got saved by the bell in that one too. But what it taught me in hindsight was I was winning that whole fight right up until this one moment. And it wasn't luck of why the guy hit me with something so hard. It was that his time preference compared to me was a lot different. He had a much lower time preference. He wasn't concerned that he was losing the fight because he was just working on a pattern. And he was like, probably at some point it clicked for him. Like, he just did the same thing twice in a row, which, like, if you're fighting a good striker, you never, ever do the same thing twice in a row if you're reacting, because you have just set a pattern. And again, maybe it was the third time he did it, I went right into a head kick, and that was a good lesson that I took into the future. I think you can apply to the info war when we're looking at a year in review and perspectives, and that we can take into 2026. It's not just, I see Spud Hill in the chat says timing is everything. That's true. But I think time preference is something that is extremely important that you're kind of hitting on. Like, there is a fundamental difference between people that can lower their time preference and stretch that timeline out and gain a different perspective with it, and people that are instant gratification. What's the next decode? What's the next opinion I'm supposed to hold because this person I like holds it, or what's the next thing Trump says. If you find yourself, we all can find ourselves drawn into that, but I would suggest that that's a sign you need to lower your time preference a little bit and step back a bit and say, okay, am I actually actively engaged in an information war, or am I just a passenger in it? That's kind of like, being carried along, even if it's in a good direction.
I'm telling you, man, I've had this conversation with other people where I'm doing a post and I just, the motivations behind it, the energies behind it, like in my head, I'm like, this is bullseye right here. But then there's something that I can't describe or put my finger on, gives me pause. And I'm like, I haven't been talking about this in weeks, if not months. So why am I doing this post right now? Did I get walked into doing this post?
Right.
Did the algorithm work me? Am I being used by social media versus me using social media? Is that what's happening right now? And if I can't answer that question, man, I won't hit post. Yeah. I won't. And there's times where I know it's a good one. Like I know it is. But if I can't convince myself that I'm doing it because I wanted to do it, like if there's even a little bit of hesitancy, I won't hit send. I just won't do it. And there's been times where I'll see a few hours later, someone else does it and thing goes viral. And I'm like, God, it's in my drafts. It's right there. And a few days will pass and everybody was wrong. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, like I dodged that one.
Right.
And the only reason I dodged it was because I had just enough wherewithal. Because like I said, I invested the time to post it. And despite what people think, there's a lot of time that goes into these posts and research,
for sure.
Creating, I'll create a screenshot, I'll drop a folder and I'll put it with the receipts. So someone later comes and says, hey, I want receipts for that. I'll be like, here they are, and I'll put this, like I said, it'll be in the drafts. And then I wonder, okay, now that I dodged it, can I find out what was pushing me to generate that post? Because now if I can go figure out what that pattern was, then the next time, this goes into the analogy you shared with your fight experience, the next time I see myself getting pushed in that direction, now I can cut it off. Now that I got it figured out, I can counter that with information because I see where they're going and I can get ahead of it. And that puts us in an offensive posture versus defensive, which I wholeheartedly think Trump has been doing for 2025, is moving us from a defensive posture to an offensive posture.
Yeah, and another way of framing that to me is some language that I used to use in the fight game was not just offensive defensive, to your point, but was active and reactive. And that fight for me taught me core fundamental difference between the two, which is this is actually one of my inside baseball combat sports peeves, is judging in combat sports is notoriously horrible because it's so subjective. I'm not even talking about corruption, but there's this criteria that they applied to boxing and UFC judging and kickboxing, which I was in, that is about ring control and aggression, right? So like damage is the number one judging criteria, but beyond damage, they're supposed to look at who is controlling the ring and who is the most aggressive if they can't decide who did more damage. And I hate that they do that because most of them don't understand what that actually looks like, right? So if you're a counter striker, you are not going to look like the more aggressive fighter. And yet you might be in control of the fight. You might take backward steps 90% of the time and be in full control of everything your opponent is doing. And yet a traditional Western judge is going to grant him a tiebreaker round because he's moving forward and you're moving backwards. And that's one of those things, like people started to rewire themselves a little bit with legends like Anderson Silva and Lyoto Machida, guys that like never moved forward and just kept winning and winning and winning and winning. So then these judges finally were like, man, isn't it weird that this guy has like 10 title defenses, but if we had been scoring decisions, we would have been saying he was losing these fights. And that's why I started thinking like, offense and defense doesn't always apply to these situations. It's action and reaction. And my own analogy or my own example of that was that fight when I had been patterned. It wasn't that I was on, in some ways he was on offense in that moment and I was on defense. But really the fundamental difference was he had started an action and I reacted to his action. So he patterned me and he threw a strike and I reacted to a strike in a predictable manner for him. And I think in the info war, that's an important thing when you're talking about like reverse engineering. Why am I writing about this? Why did I just form this opinion in the info war? If you can't retrace your steps, then it might be a sign that if you haven't been patterned intentionally, it could just be that you're being a human and you're reacting to something. Like you're reacting to something out in the battle space. And by the way, sometimes the reaction works, right? What happens in the fight game, like sometimes you react to something and you land a knockout blow and it's like you won. So if you win by reacting, that's okay. And we all do, but I think it's good. It's good to understand and reverse engineer, like, was I reacting to that and I happened to be right about it or wrong about it? Or did I actually have a lot of conviction and understanding of what I was talking about and what I was posting?
It's, you bring up some powerful points, man. And it just, I'll challenge myself and anyone else that wants to challenge themselves to think about this, for the rest of the night, next few days. Is it more impactful for Trump to come in on day one or sometime in the first 30 days and have Kash Patel just completely dismantle the FBI? Or is it more impactful for the American populace to watch the FBI and watch how the DOJ works and find that, do we need it like this? Are we utilizing it the right way? I mean, is he delegitimizing it just by showing people how it works? And right. If that's the case, which one has a more powerful impact? And I don't know the answer to that. I haven't thought about it long enough, but it's one of the things you made me think of is looking back at 2025 on some of the things that have been, some of the hot points. And am I looking at it through the lens of immediate gratification of something that I want? Or is there a long-term strategy here that maybe I didn't see and that I'll see it when I go and reevaluate it?
Yeah. That's well said. I'll hit you with kind of one more thing before I let you get out of here. And I know that I've apparently taken you from what seems to be a fairly boring game of a 35-35 fourth quarter.
No. Oh.
So I apologize. I just want to give people a little preview of next week, which was going to be this week, but this is going to work out because we will hold ourselves back from doing an intro next week. Next week is the meat and potatoes. And I had written this article, The Wars That Were. Of course, I got to use the Aragorn in there. So we're going to go into a few different theaters. War on the media industrial complex, the war on the administrative state, a few others in here. And this will also be good because it'll give both of us some time to kind of think of some examples of some of these theaters. That'll be good. But I think it's worth still staying macro, but getting a little bit more micro next week in terms of like, okay, instead of just saying 2025 was good or bad in the info war and in the awakening, let's look at some of these theaters. How are we judging this? Kind of to your earlier point, what are the victory conditions that we're looking at? And in terms of these individual theaters, I think it's actually very encouraging when I was writing that, because I felt positive overall coming out of 2025, but in some ways it was a rough year. We dealt with a lot of Badlands. Some of us dealt with a lot personally. I had a great year in terms of my son being born and all that. But in the info war, there was a lot of tension. So that was actually a good exercise for me of writing that article and being like, man, even a couple of these theaters, one of them you just referenced was sort of the DOJ. One of the theaters we'll talk about next week in more detail is the war for justice. Where are we at there? That's kind of what brought a lot of us into the awakening, so to speak, is that one. And maybe that's the most contentious, but even there, I found that I was a little more positive than I thought I was going to be on it. Kind of to the point you just made. So we'll leave those more specific discussions for next week. But what I do want to get out of here with is, now that we kind of discussed some of the mindset entering 2025, and maybe that'll help us entering 2026, I'm wondering, just big picture, the story of the American mind right now, the story of the country. Maybe that's the collective consciousness of the country. Maybe that's the way the story is being projected. Whatever it means to you, the story of Donald Trump, where do you think it's at the end of 2025 compared to at the end of 2024? Just on biggest picture that you think of, where's the story of America at?
Man,
small question for you.
That's a whole podcast right there,
yeah, just a little subtopic to get you out of here.
My back of the book version of where do I think Donald Trump is right now, the story of him. I think he's in a redefining moment of his presidency. Coming into this presidency, we all thought we knew what it was going to be like because we saw the first administration. We thought this is going to be 2.0. We know where he's going. And I think even those of us that have been extremely accurate were still shocked at the pace and lack of pace in certain things. So I really think where we're at right now is Trump telling us, you don't know exactly what I had planned. And you don't know exactly what my strategy was. So reevaluate me so you understand where I'm going, so you understand the pace that I'm going to work at and the way I'm going to get there. And also reevaluate yourself in that process. I think where we're at right now is he's redefining who he is in this second term as a president.
I like that, man. We have some good conversations, Alpha. I like that, and it makes me think. I will respond and change my answer on the fly based on that one, because it just prompted a reevaluation of my own. Something I said on this show a lot in 2024 and on DPH that this audience is familiar with is I use the word mandate all the time, to the point where it became a gay joke, of course, like everything. But I use that a lot because I noticed in 2024 Trump using that word a lot, and I liked that he was using that ahead of the election, because I think the elections are fake and gay, and I thought that was a positive signal, because I'm saying, okay, Trump is telling us this election is about the mandate to do what he needs to do in 2025. But we need to humble ourselves, to your point, because I was totally wrong about the pace of the success, or the way that success would be translated or immediately felt to the American people and to all of us in 2025. I was definitely wrong about that. When I was using that word mandate, I was thinking like, this election in 2024, the story of it and Trump's big mandate victory, which even the media was repeating, was all the signal they needed to push forward as hard and as fast as possible in 2025. And I think the humbling thing and the sobering thing, and I'm going to turn it into a positive, is that all the sifting we've talked about all year at Badlands, and that you talked about a lot tonight, including in your great solo introduction tonight, I think in hindsight, 2025 might be looked back on as the real mandate cultivation year. You just mentioned Trump defining his presidency or redefining his presidency. And I think that's a great way to look at it. But also, who is Trump supposed to represent? It's all of us, right? And maybe part of why things didn't go the way we all thought, and why we have seen such a schism and conflict within MAGA and even within the American social space, culture this whole year is because Trump and patriots are prompting that and saying, okay, maybe there's a certain percentage of the country, including the majority of it, that want Donald Trump as the president. But what do they want him to do? What do they really want him to do? And I think we would have been very confident in asserting all of the things that we think everyone wants Trump to do entering 2025. And on that, we were wrong. It doesn't mean we were wrong about what's going to be done or what might be the right thing to do. But we have found out that a lot of some of our audience and a lot of the truth community definitely did not agree with some of the ways in which we think it's obvious to attack some of these problems and that Trump thinks is obvious, right? Like look at all the pushback we got for saying government layoffs were good at the end of 2024. And then maybe we're looking in 2025 and being like, he didn't actually, not that, the government is not much smaller than it was. And maybe Trump is sitting there going like, yeah, guys, do you remember what you all did when I threatened this? You kind of freaked out. And I'm not talking about this audience. I just mean the American people. Like there was definitely more of a freak out for a lot of the things Trump wanted to do. And the good thing is maybe entering 2026, that mandate is more defined, to use your word, which might bode well for 2026. And maybe the sobering aspect of that as well, though, is that, hey, maybe the American people need to be more engaged in these discussions, not just in going to the booth in voting an election for who is supposed to run your life for the next 4 years. Maybe part of 2025 is Trump and them saying like, get involved in this and start telling us what you think we should do and what we need to do. Because, maybe the American people have been a little bit too quick, including conservatives, to hand their power over to patriots who are going to do everything for them. And, that might be a kind of a positive, but also a sobering way of looking at the path ahead.
I agree with you completely. I like that. I like that a lot.
All right, man. Well, thank you very much for joining me. And if you do end up having something that you remember you can't join me next week, just let me know in the next couple days. Otherwise, I put you on the spot on air and was
we are absolutely solid for next week.
Alpha will join me next week. We're going to go through the individual theaters of the 2025 Awakening Info War Shadow War and kind of get a little bit more micro into how it all actually went. We're still in the time of year for it. So Alpha will join me next week. Thank you very much. Thank you for holding the show together at the beginning. The people appreciate it. And guys, watch Alpha coming up in just under an hour on Q After Hours.
Yeah, you guys are gonna see me in a happy mood or pissed off with the way the game's going. Three final thoughts to leave you guys and to consider for next week is recognize, you guys, that morale is a weapon. So protect your morale. Read the phase, not the headlines, and stop expecting movie style endings to everything. We are in a real life with real battle that has real consequences. And with that, I look forward to seeing you guys next Sunday.
Well said, man. All right. Thanks a lot, man. And I will talk to you soon.
All right. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks to Alpha for joining me. Sorry about the tech difficulties, guys. I was very weird tonight. I did not know if it was me or not. Ultimately, I think it was either StreamYard things going on, like Alpha said, or regional network issues, because or maybe both, because a lot of my other services were working. StreamYard was not, Telegram was not. So anyway, sorry about that. Sorry the beginning of the show is choppy. I feel bad for people watching on replay, but I think we still had a good discussion. And these things happen for a reason. I think Alpha did a good job with the intro there. We had touched on that before the show. At least I set him up and I was like, hey man, you said some interesting stuff before the show started, so I guess you should just carry us for 40 minutes until my internet works. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. But I think that actually ends up working better for next week in hindsight, because I didn't want to keep Alpha for 3 hours. He's got his show coming up soon. But man, instead of doing a 3-hour show, we get to do 2 2-hour shows, which is 1 4-hour show, which is like, that's the prime length of a narrative. So I think that's going to work out. So I will hang out with you guys for a little bit here. Famous last words, I don't think I'm going to bring you all the way to Q after hours. But anyway, I'm going to get to the rants, the boost, whatever you guys shoot over. And maybe I'll hit a couple little things here. I know one of the big stories this week, the last few days, is this kid, Nick Shirley. I'm sure you all saw this. I'm not going to do a big thing on this, but I think it's interesting in light of tonight's conversation. We saw this Nick Shirley thing, the Somalians, daycare centers, and all of that. You know, I never know who's an operator, who's not an operator, who's legit, who's not legit, etc. X, formerly Twitter, is sometimes really cool and sometimes really gay. But let's focus on the net effects of this story blowing up. Of course, there's the obvious of the Somalians and the grift and the fraud, and that's good to have that exposed. But I think it actually dovetails a little bit into what the theme of tonight's show ended up kind of being, which is more about sovereignty as applied, the concept of sovereignty as applied to the 2025 InfoWar Awakening War of Stories. And this story about Nick Shirley and what's being, prompted here is, I think, encouraging, because it is on the surface level exactly what we all talk about in this community of sort of action, right? That action first mentality has been weaponized against the truth community and the conspiracy world for a long time. You guys know that for years we've shied away from that kind of rhetoric, and we've really been aggressive toward people who have applied that rhetoric or espoused that rhetoric, because often what they mean by action is marshal your forces and go to this government building and protest on sidewalks. And, those situations, mileage varies as to how effective they are, but those situations are rife with potential for subversion, infiltration, and conversion, basically inversion, I should say, not conversion, inversion of the original intent. So this kind of thing, I think, is a good version of this action, which is, action can mean rhetoric, it can mean narrative. I mean, obviously I named this show that for a reason. And the fact that this stuff, I think that post had that video had 100 million views. 100 million views. Now, keep in mind, that's just that video on that post. Never mind all the clips that came out of it, all the clips about the clips, all the commentary about the clips. There's 3,000 people watching live right now is talking about that clip. So the story has been extremely amplified. And I think it's just great because it demonstrates, you can just cut through the noise. The American people do want to be engaged directly in the future of their country. And I think this is a great example, because I'd say the majority of the people amplifying this narrative are probably MAGA, America First, truth community people, probably the majority of them. There's some liberals that are fired up about it. There's certainly a lot of independents that are fired up about it. But what I think is interesting about that, you might think it's obvious, but I think the encouraging thing there is that one of the biggest threats to the awakening into the future of the golden age, which is one of the titles of this episode, is apathy and passivity. Apathy, I think, is really what dooming leads to. People black pill, people doom out. They think nothing's ever going to happen. So they doom out. And apathy means that nothing good's going to happen, certainly, and a lot of bad could happen because you don't care about the future of the country. The other danger is passivity. And this is often why we do go after the unity crowd. Unity is a brand of saying that's a passive mindset. Buried at the heart of a lot of the unity crowd is this contradiction that they don't either seem consciously aware of or that they are not honest about with their audience, which is that if they are right about nothing can stop what's coming in the way they talk about it, not in the way Alpha and Brad and Josh talk about it, and a lot of us who are still Q people, including Jordan, who I had on last week, and myself, is that if you believe in that sort of rhetoric literally on all levels and all layers, you would not even retweet a video about massive exposure of this grift network in Minnesota, right? It doesn't make sense to, if you believe nothing can stop what's coming. Because if you believe that on a very literal level, then there is nothing that you can do to disrupt the plan. And there, by the same degree, that means by definition, there is nothing you can do to advance the plan. And I think that is very defeatist and nihilist in a sneaky sort of way. And I think a lot of otherwise well-meaning and well-intentioned patriots and Americans, if they get sucked into a unity doom loop, it's a unity doom loop that's disguised under positivity and passivity. And the reason I say it's a unity doom loop is because ultimately it is stripping you of the word Alpha used a lot tonight, which is sovereignty. If you are of the belief that nothing can stop this thing other people are doing on your behalf in a very literal way, then you are de facto admitting that you very literally have no power over your future, on the macro anyway, in the future of the country. And I believe we do have a lot of power there. And a lot of that power can be narrative. Look at this kid, Shirley. I don't know him. I don't know anything about him. I saw some good things said about him in the chat. But take his name out of it. Use anybody. Could have been anybody. Look at how much his message just got amplified and the tangible effects that will have. Now, the reason I think these things can be both unplanned and organic and part of the plan is that I kind of think the way the plan operates on some level is that Trump and team will look at the battle space, at the American battle space, and they will wait for an opportunity to rapidly cultivate and solidify the very public mandate that they need or that they want to advance an actual. So in other words, do any of you watching this show right now think that the Trump administration, if you have a good opinion of them, and the Patriots have not mapped out this sort of grift network to the tune of billions of dollars on, in Minnesota, anywhere else? I'm sure there's a million different examples of this, right? Let's use this Somali network as an example. Do any of you, with all the things Trump has said about the Somalis, with all the things he's put the focus on with Tim Walz, with all the focus on Minnesota over the last 5 years, since 2020, really, right? They were a real hotbed of BLM and even election fraud. Do any of us really believe that they have not known, the Patriots have not known about this stuff? No, most of us believe they've known about it, right? So some people could spin that into a black pill and say, well, they didn't do anything about it. Well, that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that they're waiting for the direct request by the American people to do something about it. And that doesn't mean the American people have to do it on an actual level, but that if Patriots have mapped it and prodded us in certain directions, hey, look at this, hey, look at that over there, the Q drops famously and infamously use the Socratic method to very resounding success with a lot of us, both on a micro and a macro. Individuals it worked very well on, including me. And on a macro, I think it's worked pretty well. But that's exactly, I think, what they look for. That's that mandate cultivation process. Chris and John often talk about it as that feedback loop between Trump and the American people. Well, what do you think's going on here? I mean, we're clearly going to get more official investigations into this and action, I believe, and I hope. But that action needed to be prompted by mass outrage, which is to say mass engagement with that specific narrative. And I think that's part of how this mandate cultivation process is working, where you're going to get these hints like, hey, look over there. And then somebody does look over there and they're like, there's a bunch of shit over here. Somebody should do something about this. Well, what should we do about it? You should do this about it, right? And then this whole audience, this whole community kind of spends a certain amount of time and energy mapping out and arguing about exactly what we should do about it. And where does it lead? Where do all these webs lead? Where do all these strings lead? And then, we can get action on the back of that. So it's kind of, I think, a good example. This specific narrative, I think, is a good example of how the micro is the macro is the micro. The plan can be real and have certain safeguards, and nothing can stop what's coming can be real in a certain sense, while it's also true that your actions and your narratives and your deployments in the info war do matter. They do advance the ball. And I think that it's kind of it's the inversion of the horseshoe theory that a lot of people talk about. Ghost talks about that a lot. Like if you go all the way establishment Republican, you're going to end up as a collectivist. If you go all the way liberal collectivist, you're going to end up as an establishment Republican. Like it's the horseshoe theory. The inversion of that would be kind of this thing of saying, hey, if you're blackpilling and dooming out, you are not only not advancing the ball, you are actively, on some respect, holding the awakening and the info war back and the golden age back. And if you believe that everything's a foregone conclusion and that you have no part to play in the actualization of that golden age vision, then I would argue that even if you're not actively pulling the movement back, you are being dragged along with it in a passive dead weight manner, which means that, it might be better if we just cut that chain and let you drift along. I think that's sort of a way to look at that. So anyway, thought it was good. Thought that was good news. Another little thing here. I gave him credit, unfortunately, earlier, but yeah, it was a good call. Our own Heroldian one was talking about one such pattern. Speaking of patterns tonight, a pattern on the very serious, very real, definitely not at all pre-planned or fake negotiations and conversations between Zelensky and the Trump administration. And as John pointed out a few days ago, or when was this? December 20th? I think he posted this on Friday, maybe.
Zelensky's going to Florida to meet with Trump.
Hold on one second. Let me slow this down to normal speed.
Trying to finalize the peace deals. And then he'll have a call with Putin, I bet. He'll probably have a call with Putin Saturday, is my guess. Because typically he talks to Putin before he meets with Zelensky.
First of all, what an idiot, dummy, dum-dum this guy is. I'm pretty sure the fake phone call with Putin was Sunday morning. Idiot. But otherwise, it's largely correct on the macro.
So there'll be a phone call. We'll get a true social post about it. Call went great. Things are good. I have a bet going with myself that Trump's going to have a phone call with Putin that he's going to post on True Social tomorrow before the meeting Sunday.
Oh, yeah.
The perfectest phone call. I like it. Perfectest.
Yeah. So he's done every time. This is the same thing that's happened like 12 times in a row.
So again, the reason John's a total idiot is that Trump announced his fake phone call this morning, which took place in the fake narrative this morning. Just had a very good and very productive telephone call with President Putin of Russia prior to my meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine. The meeting will take place in the blah, blah, blah. We don't care about that, right? It was a fake meeting. It was a fake phone call. But yeah, that's an example of good pattern recognition there, right? Recognizing the pattern of, I've been calling this in my writing for a couple of years in different theaters, the curious case of intermittent escalation. And this year, the curious case of intermittent de-escalation, and how you can actually see the escalations coming and the de facto de-escalations on the back of them once you know how they're translating the story. So John and Chris often refer to reruns, and yeah, they're absolutely right that these are reruns. So kind of to the conversation Alpha and I had tonight, I don't have the answer to this, but I think it's interesting to think about why the reruns. If we agree that these are largely reruns, why? Right? If you think that everything's a humiliation ritual and that there's no such thing as a plan and that we're being dog-walked into the Great Reset, then that's one potential reading of reruns, mollification, that sort of thing. I don't believe that makes sense, nor is true. But it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense with pure nothing can stop what's coming rhetoric, because what's the point? the reruns aren't necessarily. I used to say these are waking more people up every time this happens. I actually don't know if that's really what's going on now. I think this is going to be a process of constantly reevaluating our old stances and updating, hopefully upgrading our cognitive ciphers here. But the way I've really started to think of these reruns is more on a narrative timeline sense of not just saying, oh, they're just delaying things, but more they are waiting for certain other fronts to be forwarded so that they can get the most convergence in the narrative that's most effective at the same time, right? So you're not going to announce a trade deal, a finalized trade deal with China until you have weaponized the very escalatory narratives that have kickstarted and accelerated the very onshoring strategy that Trump came into his second administration, publicly announcing as an end goal. You're not going to get to the end state before you wield the narratives that are prompting the mechanisms that will achieve that end state, which is a little bit of a different reading, I think, than just, this is a narrative timeline. I call these translation layers often. Chris uses that similar terminology to that as well. I think that that's true, but I think that there's definitely an actual component to the narratives. The reason I do the narrative is not just because I think it's all a story. It's because I think the stories are actively changing the battle space and prompting the mechanisms, prompting the actuals on the battle space to be forwarded. So when we see these reruns, there's some awakening that probably happens on the basis of, seeing the Europeans warmonger, seeing Zelensky beg for money, continuing to turn public mandate against him, continuing to sort of slowly and softly massage Putin, which that'd be a funny clip to pull if you want to take me out of context there. Not that anybody would ever do that. But to slowly and gently massage Vladimir Putin, as is Trump's wont to do, into the public mind, the Western mind, as being like, well, Trump thinks he's reasonable, at the very least. So there's some awakening component there. But I've definitely softened on that a little bit in how I see these things now. And now I see it more as you've got these multiple threads. Think of like a CPU running multiple threads of narrative. And these threads are on different narrative time. But narrative time would be, the way I think of narrative time might be you and your friend are reading the same story, right? You're reading the same book. He's on chapter 12 and she's on chapter 9. You exist in the same temporal reality, the same timeline, but on the narrative that you're reading, you are on completely different timelines. Very simple. Think of the war of stories as a layer cake of parallel running narrative timelines, parallel running narratives, but there's a different number of chapters and length of narrative on each layer. So the economic reordering, the economic narrative and unwinding is on one layer. There's a certain number of chapters there, certain number of actuals that need to be prompted by these narratives on that layer. Then the March for Justice. One of the funny things is I actually am beginning to think the most frustrating layers of the war of stories are the ones that require the least translation. And maybe I would have thought something totally different a couple of years ago with the war for justice. But I kind of think this whole community has been at the end state of the war of justice, the war for justice. Like, we all kind of know the names we want rolled up, right? We all know the justice we want to see. I think a lot of that's been translated. And that narrative feels like it's kind of just hovering before the final act. But maybe the reason is that it's been waiting for these other ones to be translated. And as I've talked about ad nauseum on these shows and on DPH with John for at least the last year, that you guys know is, a lot of the American people, a lot of people in general are really Trump's rhetorical narrative wars with Putin and Xi in particular in 2025 have exposed a total lack of understanding of what needs to be unwound from an economic perspective in order to push us into the golden age that Trump has been talking about. That's why I've been focusing on the economic narrative so much in 2025 and the technology one. John and I talked about that on Wednesday night. Chris and I talked about that on Tuesday night. Jordan and I did last week as well. I think it's interesting to look at different threads running, but they're running at different speeds. And one of the things that I've said from the start, something you should feel good about if you're in this audience, is if there is something that separates the ability of awakening rather than awakened, we should not use the past tense of awakened because it implies that we're done. And we're clearly not, because we're wrong about shit all the time, and we learn shit all the time, and we get humbled all the time. What separates awakening people from sleepers, I think, is the ability not to discern or observe these narrative translations. That's part of it. But I think that the superpower that you can cultivate is the ability to jump onto different layers while keeping those threads running parallel in your mind. You can observe the war, the chapter of the War of Stories, or the thread that's all about the dissolution of the rules-based international order, Donald Trump's national security strategy that he put out this past, a few weeks ago, is a prime example of that. Dissolution of the narrative of the rules-based international order, the Western hegemon, the Western globalist hegemon, as I often call it, and the very beginnings of the translation of the need for the multipolar world, and I think the Sovereign Alliance is going to be what actualizes that. So that's one layer, but you can see where that narrative is at while also being able to jump above or below it onto a different layer, such as the war for justice, and saying, hey, we're actually stalled out here. And I think that that's objective. On a narrative translation level, it is okay, and you're not dooming out to say the war for justice on a narrative level has completely stalled out. It has been spinning its tires for a decade. For a decade, I think it is fair to argue. But on an actual level, we see people lawyering up, we see subpoenas going out, we see grand juries being impaneled, we're hearing about them rather. We know the investigations are done, just like I say the economic deals are done, and I think the peace deals are done. The rest of what we're looking at is narrative translation layers on different narrative timelines. And I think the why there is, again, waiting for a convergence where communities like this are going to be able to see that convergence coming and recognize that convergence when it is here and supercharge into the future based on that. Whereas sleepers are going to be carried along by the energy of that convergence into the golden age. But the choice to know, I don't think means people get left behind on an actual level. But I do think that they are left behind on a narrative level and maybe on an awareness level, right? Which is kind of sad. But that's your reward for paying attention to shit that's really hard to pay attention to and think about and analyze and care about and invest the amount of energy that you've invested into it. Did any of that make sense? I don't know. It's entirely possible. I am crazy, but that is just how I think of things. I try to split my mind, not in a schizophrenic way, hopefully, but I try to run my mind on various narrative timelines running in parallel and try to observe their momentum and speed relative to each other. And that's how I try to sort of paint a picture or form a picture in my own mind of where we are at in general. And 2025, where are we at? I think we are toward the end of the beginning. I think that a lot of the narratives, a lot of the big storylines that this community cares about are reaching similar points. And that doesn't mean end points, but I think they are reaching climaxes. I think 2025, if you're looking at it on the Fichtean curve structure I've often babbled on about on this show over the years, or the more simple 3-act structure where you've got your rising action, your climax, and your falling action. I think 2025 has been this interesting year where Donald Trump, as the prime translator, as the prime cognitive cipher or character in the War of Stories, and as the signal setter, as I called him early in the year, I think he has been jumping between narratives: economic war, war against globalism, war for justice, war for peace, and he's been ramping them up on the rising action, the tension, the narrative tension, mass psychological tension sort of arc. And then he jumps onto another one. Have you guys noticed that? That's one I pointed out online sometimes. I've tried to tweet less actually lately. I hope some people don't miss that kind of stuff, but it really is sucking a lot of my mental energy, and I'm trying to translate that into cooler things that you guys might like more. You know, like I'll talk about that at the end of the show. But I've noticed that pattern where Trump is he'll ramp up the narrative of the impending World War III for like 2 weeks straight, and then he'll jump off that ride completely and won't even reference it, and is like, now we're talking about the cartels all week. That's just not how the world works, right? Like, the war, if World War III is pending, it doesn't stop pending because Trump doesn't want to talk about it this week, which is one of your hints, I think, of the sort of narrative control going on here. But I think the encouraging way of looking at that is I think he is engaging with the American people in the battle space and kind of pushing these carts up their narrative arcs, kind of getting them all into similar positions. And let's see what happens in 2026. I do not think that we end these arcs in 2026, but maybe we start cresting the rise in some of them, which is the climax, and we start getting that descent, which is to say the speed, which is where translations really start hitting really, really fast. That can mean many different things. It's pretty broad, but we got to think about these things in a pretty broad way, because if we mire ourselves down in the micro of specific predictions and everything, not only are we wrong, but we're not really doing anything of value, in my opinion. So anyway, again, hope some of that made some sense. Nothing that I planned to talk about, but nevertheless. Now I will grab some of your rants here. There was a boost that came through last week from Son of Kaczynski that sent $5 over. Said, I was raised to value message over messenger, but out of respect for the system, I'm open to a second opinion. It's kind of a strange message that loops back in on itself. But thank you for the boost. Rants we got here. By the way, guys, please hit the thumbs up button, even despite the technical difficulties at the start of the show. Tom Terrific 54, $25 for the upcoming year. May it be epic. Damn straight, Tom. I think it is going to be epic. I actually do think it's going to be epic. And I think I'm going to be right about being wrong this time. Think about that. G. Fontes, is this going to interfere with your regular Sunday show, Alpha? And if so, how? It's not. Alpha is doing his show in 21 minutes with Brad and Josh there. Fixed Bayonet, $30. The question for tonight's episode is, how does Alpha feel about Hobbit feet? We didn't, I was so flustered at the start that I wasn't able to work any did I work any Lord of the Rings in tonight? I don't think I did. That'll be rectified. Well, yeah, my header image. I'm going to end with that. My header image was all Lord of the Rings, so we're good. AOB22, $10. Thanks for keeping all the plates spinning on those sticks. Badlands is definitely the fun family members. It's one way to look at us. I'm going to need this old-fashioned I made that I was going to sip gentlemanly during our conversation, but I ended up just drinking coffee the whole time. That's good. That's damn good. Peyton Pooh. 5D is the reaction for the emotional response. Kentucky Brad. Thanks, guys, for $5. Thank you, Kentucky Brad. Peyton Pooh, Burning Bright and Alpha. Not sure if my first rant took, but BB, 5D is the observance and emotional reaction to the narrative, praised differently. That's an interesting way to look at it. Deborah Stars, awakening to true identity is to experience one's sovereignty, then one finds oneself in great good company. I like that. That's a good way to put it. Keith O'Higgins, I kind of miss the theaters with sticky floors. I do too. And the smell of poisonous popcorn when that oil they say is butter they put on it. Mrs. Bright, by the way, fiends for movie theater popcorn and butter. Like, if I make it at home, it's like, she's like, I mean, it was fine. I appreciate the attempt, but it was not the same thing as going to an overpriced theater and being assaulted by the sort of bacterium that persist on in that machinery. But she's into it, you know, it is what it is. I mean, ivermectin probably has nothing on that, right? Like, if you want an immune boost, forget all this stuff. You know, Jordan was a sponsor to Tamarack. Like, you guys can mess with that stuff. It's probably way better than this. But I'm just saying, devil's advocate, if you're looking for a rabies shot, movie theater popcorn might avoid cancer by like rushing headfirst into it to the point where cancer's like, this guy's crazy. I don't even want to be here. This guy's nuts. This could go either way. He seems like he's trying to die. He seems like he's trying to clog up his arteries with such force that his body is going to generate an immune response to the attempt to clog the arteries, and that movie theater popcorn is going to act as rocket fuel that just cleans out the entire system. Never did I think I would prompt myself into that kind of a diatribe, but I'm always surprising myself with these things. Peyton Pooh, just remember the end of my thought. Many such cases. 5D equals 0.714 weak emotional response. Trump mentioned 6G, 7G, I think related, personal opinion. Glad you guys got to roll out the show together. Yeah, I don't know what any of that means, but it sounds just schizophrenic enough while being a little coherent that you might be onto something. Makes sense to me. Your book was great, BB. I'm usually reading 2 or 3 books at once, and yours took center stage. I'm no Dostoevsky, but nothing is. I did like the Russian lit nod. Can't wait for the inevitable sequels. Well, glad to hear that. Yeah, for anybody unaware, the Swordpunk books have been released. If you're somehow one of the people that bought one of those books or prompted one of those books to be produced, that is in my basement on my pool table, neatly wrapped and packaged and signed, and you never sent me your address, you must email real Mrs. Burning Bright, MRS, real Mrs. Burning Bright at gmail.com, and we will email your book. We will mail your book to you. But if we do not get that, then we're probably going to like resell them, maybe at a discount or something like that, to some people that have been asking for copies, because it was a limited run. And yeah, I'll have news probably in January about the digital launch. But yeah, people have been liking it. Swordpunk. Steph Asia got her copy of Swordpunk from her forwarding shipping. So awesome. Glad people are enjoying it. It's a fun caper. It's a fun sort of action caper. It's not meant to be too serious. Fun and dark and fun. I think judging by the responses, including in my own old publishing life, I think it struck the balance there. I also think it would make a good screenplay. It was written as a screenplay originally. So if you guys, maybe we can get that made instead of all the gay stuff that's going on. Keith O'Higgins, a few topics to research or discuss might be the Fed bailed out $17 billion in silver calls on Saturday. They're usually closed for business on the weekend. Also, former CISA head Chris Krebs' clearance yanked. I didn't see the Krebs thing. Yeah, I don't know about the $17 billion, but that's cool if it is. It is interesting. KenCon, are you live now? Oh, you're doing Swordpunk. Man, I was going to say, should you guys delay doing Swordpunk until the digital launch comes out? We probably shouldn't negotiate it right now, but it might be good because then the audience can get the book for $5 instead of all the people who bought it for $75 to get the leather. I don't know. If you guys are going to do it anyway, that's okay. People can watch it on replay, but it's just a thought. James Klain, 2 of my favorite people. Yeah, CanCon. I'm planning on launching it hopefully in February, which would the week after the Super Bowl maybe. So we'll see. King Khan is streaming there. All right, I can probably do that. James Klein, two of my favorite people for $20. Thank you, James Klein. Thought that was a good conversation. Deborah Stars, I thought I bought the book. Haven't gotten it. Deborah, I think you did message us, and we did look at that. I don't know if this is you. There was a Deborah who bought the book and then issued a chargeback to the credit card company for fraud. So that might have been a mistake that you made, but I'm not going to send the book to somebody who not only issued a chargeback, but actually took money from me. Because when you issue a chargeback, the bank takes the $75 back from us and like a $10 fee on charge of that, on top of that. So we lost money when people charge us for that, and we paid for the book to be produced. So you might have done that by accident. I tried to be clear with people, but there were some people who were like, what's this Kickstarter thing on my credit card statement? And then accused us of fraud. So you're not getting a book if you did that. But, you know, these things are annoying. If that was you, you can always repurchase the book, maybe. Maybe that's a way to do it. But shoot the email over. We can look at that case. There, if that was not you, Deborah, then I don't know what it is. Did you spend $75 in the Kickstarter campaign? Email realmrsburningbright@gmail.com. Give your email address and everything. There are some people who said they ordered a book, and then we do not have any receipt or anything like that. Could have been some of these things on some of these issues on Kickstarter where some people like thought they got through the checkout process but didn't. But if you do believe you ordered one and you didn't get one, then we'd like to see a receipt just so that we can trace it to the book order. So if you have like a credit card receipt, a bank receipt for the Kickstarter order or anything like that, email that stuff over. Sorry to get bogged down in these details, guys, but it is what it is. All right. Caught up on rants, caught up on book stuff and all of that. So next week, we're going to do part 2 of the Golden Age Year 1. The Golden Age Year 1 part 2 is coming next week, next Sunday night. Alpha's going to be my guest again. Still a great time of year to do this. And we are going to use my latest long form that published today. I know everybody was watching football, but the early response has been very positive. I wrote a feature called The Wars to Come in 2024 that was very popular. And I decided to do sort of a follow-up to that. The Wars That Were 2025 edition along the rapid, rocky road to the Golden Age. Go to burningbright.substack.com for this. If you guys are interested, it is free to read. If you want to support the work I do, you can send me a coffee tip or sign up for a paid subscription. And I saw a bunch of you guys did that, which is awesome. It helps out a lot. Substack is an awesome platform. And these are some of the theaters I went into. This is my conception of how the story kind of went. This isn't all the details and all the micro. This is like, where are we at in the Golden Age? Did it actually start and we weren't really paying attention? Were we paying attention to the wrong things? War on the media industrial complex. This is not a short article, so you guys can work on it all week around New Year's. The war on the administrative state. The war on the banking cartels. What is that? What does he mean by that? What do we got here? The war on the globalist hegemon. One of my favorite words. I can't say W words today. The war for justice. Controversial. The war for peace. And a bonus item. The war for time. End of it. And a little thank you section to the people that have supported me on this show, but especially on that Substack over there. This year was... I think a lot of us probably feel like this year was tough in some ways. Tougher than we thought on a macro and certainly on a micro. But also very good in other ways. I feel really good about 2026. There's a lot of necessary sifting that happened in my life, that happened at Badlands, that happened in the truth community, that happened in the awakening. I think it's good with the benefit of hindsight. I think we're in a good position, a good, powerful posture going forward. And I feel really encouraged by that. And I want to thank you guys for all the support, for supporting my book launch this year, my book relaunch. Now, that's not just about, hey, I'll relaunch the book. I told you guys, by the way, on the Kickstarter page, you can see what we made from it and what we used the money for and everything. But that was a big deal for me of getting, it helped me fund the rights repurchase of my fiction, my fantasy. You guys know I don't just write ninja books. I wrote an epic fantasy series that I've been dying to get the rights back to, but it cost me a pretty penny to do it. I finally saved up enough and you guys supported enough where I was able to do that this month. So bought those rights back. I don't even know if that'll come out in 2026. Might not come out till 2027 because I'm going to put a new coat of paint on that, re-edit those books. And it's pretty interesting how God works. I wrote those fantasy books starting in 2015, which was my kind of breakout for my limited breakout in the genre fiction world. And in hindsight, the theme of that fantasy series is all about awakening, which was not really meant to have anything to do with this stuff. This was long before I was even a Trump person. I wasn't a Trump guy in 2015. So long before the Q drops, 2 years before the Q drops. But man, if it doesn't fit in with the themes that we're all kind of into around here, I think you guys will dig it. It was originally pitched as a blend of Tolkien and Miyazaki. And to that I hold. And I think I'm the only person that's really done that. So I'm looking forward to re-releasing that at some point. But Swordpunk is up first. And if the digital goes well, I'm going to write sequels to it that are going to be badass. And you should read them. And also, my 2025 was defined by the birth of my son, Baby Bright, on the first day of the year. And if that wasn't a sign for me, then I don't know what the hell could be. Because man, was it a journey to get there. And we had some hard years and many different reasons on a personal life level, family, all that kind of stuff. And my little boy was born on January 1st, 2025. And he is turning 1 year old in a few days. And he is the best. He's the cutest and he is the happiest. And yeah, he's pretty based. So this year cannot be anything other than a rousing success for from where I'm sitting, even if it was tough along the way. So thank you guys and for being with us, for those who stuck with us, and for those who stuck with me in particular. And if you didn't, fuck you, pussy. If I care about that shit, get the fuck out of here with that nonsense. Also want to tell you guys, subscribe to the Badlands Substack, badlands.substack.com. We are changing things up a little bit, starting probably in the next couple of weeks. We are going to focus a lot more, first of all, on the core Badlands team. I speak for myself, not for Badlands, but I do edit the Badlands Substack over there, along with Ash. And you know what? We're going to focus on the core Badlands team, and we're going to stop kind of propping people up that end up like infamously betraying us down the line and giving them access to all of you guys. So it's going to be focused on the core Badlands team. We are no longer going to boost other people's work over there that do not come from Badlanders. And we're going to do some different stuff. We're going to focus on our more timely content sort of over there and more original content. So in the place of features, we're going to keep the news brief going because it's been super popular. Ash and Ghost have really been running that thing for most of 2025. I'm going to get back in the saddle a bit here. Ash is still going to be taking lead on a few of those days, on 3 days. I'm going to take the lead on one of the days. Ghost is going to take the lead on one of the days. We're going to tell him not every topic can be Israel. So I think you guys will enjoy that. And we've got something cooking where we are going to experiment with a Substack exclusive show. So it's going to be a show that we're probably going to do at the end of the week. We're probably going to release that on Saturdays. It's going to be free. Go to badlands.substack.com, subscribe. You will get that show. We're going to maybe keep it to an hour. I probably will be the host on that show most weeks. And we're probably going to rotate between Ghost and Ash with me, or sometimes it might be Ash and Ghost without me. And we're going to do, I think we're going to call it the Badlands Blitz. And what we also want to do with that, and I'll talk about this when we launch it, is involve, we kind of have a Substack audience over there that's super active in the comments and shares that stuff and has these great conversations. And we want to kind of interact on Saturdays and boost some of those comments and interact a little bit and really do more what we're doing on a macro level on this show, which is kind of a retrospective on 2025 as a year. We don't do a lot of like retrospectives on the week. So if we're going to do a daily retrospective, which is what the brief is, then the Blitz is going to be a weekly retrospective, but it's going to be in show form delivered to you via Substack. So check that out. If you guys do like it and you support over there with a paid subscription, there's all these different ways you can support us, and that will let us know whether or not that's something you want. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. The first show, I'm guessing, will be in a week or two, but I will keep you posted on that. Otherwise, it's going to be business as usual. 2026 is going to be awesome, and next week's show is going to be awesome, and everything is going to be awesome, I think. So, as I always say, the war is a story. The story is a war. Act accordingly. I will see you next week for the Golden Age Year 1, Part 2.
We were sleeping. I've been sleeping. Been turning away from a truth I wanted not to face. There is a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There is a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here.
How many men have you killed, Malone?
I don't know.
50? 100? Countless.
Countless has a nice ring to it.
And how many lives have you saved?
500,000. Population of King's Landing. Tell me if your precious Randy commanded you to kill your own father and stand by while thousands of men, women, children burned alive, would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
Our time has come. We prepared. We grew stronger. Were you rested in your cradle of power? You were trusted to lead the Republic. But you were deceived. You assumed no force could challenge you. And now, finally, we have returned.
The visions are clear now. I see possible futures all at once. Our enemies are all around us. And in so many futures they prevail. But I do see a way. There is a narrow way through.
It's not a prophecy. It's a story that you keep telling, but it's not their story, it's yours. They deserve to be led by one of their own. What your people did to this world is heartbreaking.
We gave them something to hope for.
That's not hope!
We have survived by hiding from them, by running from them. But they are the gatekeepers. They are guarding all the doors, they are holding all the keys, which means that sooner or later, someone is going to have to fight them.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such time, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us.
Forgive me. I did not see. I have failed you all.
You will bring me. John, I do not know what strength is in my heart. But I swear to you, I will not let the White City fall. Our people failed. Our people
our people.
I wish you good fortune in the wars to come. And now it begins.
No. Now it ends.